And welcome back to the Book and Life podcast. I am your host, Crystal Fleming, and I'm going to be on with an incredible writer who's come all the way from a signing and rushed terribly and is absolutely the sweetest thing on the planet. And I can't wait to introduce you to her. But first off, as you know, we do the advert for Marianne Curley's The Shadow, Time Guardian Book 4 novel. The battle is over, the war is won, the prophecy complete, but life can't just pick up where it left off for Ethan. Struggling to cope with tragic loss, at odds with friends in the guard, he finds himself adrift, jumping at shadows and sensing someone who can't possibly be there. Blaming herself for Goddess Lathena's death, Giselle swears revenge and fulfill the Immortals' plan for world domination, but Giselle hadn't planned on love. And that leaves her with an unbearable choice. Should she follow her heart or the strings of a goddess short on praise but high on expectation, who continues to pull her from the grave? As the Guard and the Order battle through the past and into an impossible future, darkness lurks around every corner. The fight for the world's survival rests with just one. Is it friend or foe who stands in the shadow? And with that being said, and obviously it's a lot of fun, I have the great and distinct pleasure of welcoming Deborah Carr. Now, please tell me I've said that right, because I've had a week of getting people's names wrong.
No, my name is, as it's written, really, Deborah Carr. Yeah, that's right.
Woohoo! I've had some Americans on, and I of course I pronounce it the English way. And then I get told, no, that's not right. So I spent all week getting corrected.
Quite difficult, can't they? Yeah, and in different places, they can say things in different ways as well.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I just feel like I'm lagging a bit behind in the old knowledge department. So, so tell us about what you're excited about, whether it's a new release or one that you've got upcoming. Tell us all about it. We're dying to hear.
Okay, well, I've actually got two. I write for two publishers. So I write historical fiction for HarperCollins' One More Chapter division, and I write uplifting contemporary romance series for Boldwood Books. And I have the first in a new series, Finding Love on Sunshine Island. It's a new series, Sunshine Island series, coming out on the 25th of May with Boldwood Books. That comes out in ebook, paperback, large print, and audiobook all on the same day, which is very exciting. And then on the 21st of July, I have my next HarperCollins book out, and that's called The Beekeeper's War. That's historical fiction it's in two parts, set in First World War and the Second World War.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I must admit, I've seen the advert on your email for them, and I love the look of them. I really do. I'm a bit of a World War II fanatic sometimes, because I grew up in Shetland where they had so much to do with the war, but people outside the island don't actually know about it. So I always thought it was to hear the stories from the actual people themselves that served and, you know, have lived that long afterwards was always really interesting for me. And history in general for Shetlander is amazing because you live it every day. There's Viking settlements all over the islands. There's, World War II museums and monuments all over the island. So that's the two kind of areas that they really kind of drum into us at school because it's fabulous. Places they can go. Yeah. So I love it. And I must admit, I love the covers. I think they're absolutely amazing. And I've got them on my TBR for sure.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy them. Living Jersey, my most recent book that came out last year, An Island at War, that was set on the island of Jersey. Most of my books are either set here or set partially here. The island is part of the Channel Islands, so people, especially America, will mostly know the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. So Guernsey, that's the next. Jersey's the biggest island, and Guernsey's the next smallest. And we're off the coast of France, and the islands were occupied from the summer 1940 to May 1945. Each one was liberated on a different day. We were liberated on the 9th of May, and so that book was set on the island during the occupation. There were letters from a younger sister who was evacuated, like my father was, to London and obviously had to live through the Blitz. But yes, like you
Yeah.
say, there are reminders every single day. I mean, we have bunkers all along the coast, all over the place. Part of Hitler's Atlantic Wall goes right across the bay nearest to me, St. Juan's Bay. And the place was bombed as well, and
Hmm.
it was a very, very dark and difficult time. The islanders who stayed on the island throughout that time almost starved to death, as did the German soldiers themselves in the end. So it was a very
Yeah.
dark time, but like with you, you have reminders all the time because there are these bunkers. And I mean, growing up, I didn't actually pay any attention to them at all. Just might sit on one to read a book or sunbathe or something. Now,
Yeah,
of
I think
course,
we all
they
did
have
that, yeah.
much more of a resonance. Yeah,
I think as we grow up, we kind of almost appreciate what's around us more. I think because
yeah,
we can understand it, we can take it in a bit more. And I think I always took Shetland in a way for granted because I didn't understand why there was all these buildings that were built out the ocean. And I didn't understand that Shetland had this huge history that had nothing to do with the islanders and everything to do with Viking history and smuggling and World War II stuff. So, like my grandfather, both of them served, and they liked to take time with me when I was growing up, and they would tell me stories and say, I always loved it because they would start off with, "You don't know how lucky you are."
yeah.
Like that was the start of every story.
Very, very
So I knew
true.
it was coming. It was always going to be a war story of why I should appreciate the time that I was in and the time that was coming forward and stuff like that. And I loved it. I think they probably sort of shoved me into history in a way for that reason. And I was never great at it in school, but I found myself loving it the older I got and understanding it more. And when I sat down and I did my own historical drama, and I'm still working on it, but I took stories from the bus missions and I tied it in with the royal family, the last lineage of royalty that was attached to Shetland. And I thought that was such a good way because you get a bit of the Downton Abbey feel to it, but then you've also
Lovely.
got the realism of all these people, listening to the maritime radio in their houses thinking, is that my husband's ship going down? Or is
Oh
that,
gosh, yes.
who's that's in trouble? And my great grandmother, she was an amazing woman. She actually had I always remember this so vividly, but she had the maritime radio in her living room, and she had lost quite a couple. I think it was 2 or 3 husbands to the ocean, and she
Crikey.
would sit, and if somebody's ship didn't come back, she was the first person that would go round because she
Mm.
knew the police were not the most, or the Coast Guard were not the most great at the passing on of bad news. So she would actually go along and she would be the first kind of person they would see, and she would bring them something, whether it was cake or
I suppose she knew
a
better
meal or
than probably
something.
most how they felt.
Yeah, and that was the thing. And she would tap on the door and they'd go, "Oh, go bath are we up here for?" And she would say, "I've come about Larry or come about Lawrence or whatever," and they would kind of know then
Mm.
that she'd heard it. And some of the men, like particularly, they would actually radio in what they would call dying messages, and then she would pass them on. So it was almost like a very strange way of kind of. I connected with her through that growing up in Yale for a little bit of the time that I did, and I just couldn't believe that this amazing woman was my grandmother.
That is utterly
Um,
fascinating.
yeah, and I wish she'd sort of lived a lot or longer time because I
Yeah.
would have loved to have heard her stories about the bus and about what she did with that and her involvement with that kind of stuff. Because there was even kind of from my grandfather's perspective, there's very few stories told about the women that were actually involved in the bus projects.
Yes.
So a lot of people think, oh, it's just the fishermen that would go out there. No, actually, a lot of the women were involved in not just making sure the meals were going with the men, but they were, some of them were going out and they were fishing for the community and they were making stuff for the community. Like it was literally, as soon as that noise broke that the war was started, the community just fired all of their stuff together so that no kid would go without, nobody would be hungry. And it really became a bonded community in a way,
Yes.
but it was bonded through loss.
Yes. Yeah. I think that happened an awful lot, and I think well, it needed to really, didn't it, for people to survive in an awful lot of cases.
Yeah. And I like that, and I kind of almost miss that community spirit in a way, because you don't really get that same sort of community spirit now. And yeah, so when the pandemic hit, I was surprised how much Shetland came together during
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
and I was sort of very, very
Unfortunately, all I
grateful for
know of
that.
Shetland is the fabulous series on television. I love it. What do you think of that?
Interesting. I use that word a lot. It just doesn't feel like Shetland to me. It just feels so alien, that series, because we're not all raving lunatics trying to kill each other.
We did have for quite a few years. We had a series filmed here called Bergerac. Back in the
Yeah.
80s, I think it was. And it was the same thing. It's like trying to tell people we're not all diamond smugglers. We're not, all like
Yep.
kidnappers and murderers. We're actually very ordinary people. They've just made it about the island. So, yes, I can understand and appreciate what you think about that, because we had the same sort of thing.
And it was great because what Anne did was she and her husband actually lived in Shetland when she wrote the series. So she got the accent spot on, but when they
Oh,
took
wonderful.
the Glaswegian and they stuck him in the role, it was just so wrong. It really
To me, it's fabulous
there's
series, but I suppose for you as somebody from there, so you look at it from a completely different
well, we're
aspect, really.
supposed to believe he's from Shetland, and I'm sorry,
Oh,
the
isn't it the
Glasgow
accent?
comes
Yeah.
through, and you can't deny it. It's like
Yeah.
I literally I looked at my mother-in-law and I went, "Can you not hear his Glasgow accent?" I can, and she's like, "No." I was like, "Oh dear, oh." That awkward moment of where you're like, I'm gonna go make the tea.
Yes, there's a little bit too much.
And then she always makes the joke of when she first met me, all I talked was Shetland, and I had to learn to kind of slow down and speak a bit more Glaswegian and a bit slower. And I always laugh at her because she used to get onto me so much for saying certain Shetland words, and now she kind of misses that a little bit about me. She's like, "Oh, your accent where you speak with it is so sing-song," and I'm like, "This has been my accent the entire time."
I think it's a lovely accent. Really.
Occasionally, I do go American if I've been on with Americans, because I have this horrible habit of mimicking, and a lot of Shetlanders do that. Because we travel so much, and we call it restless feet, because like when the sun's not up as much, Shetlanders long to be in the sun, so we kind of, because the winter's so dark and so long in Shetland, that we start to itch and we kind of want to go places and kind of just pee in the sun.
So you do have
Remember
like the
daylight.
longer nights, so it's much shorter days, do you?
Yeah, it doesn't get
Okay.
dark, yeah, which is murder if you're trying to sleep, because you got
Yeah.
school the next day, and so that kind of sucks. But yeah, I mean, there's nights where it just does not get dark, and it's great if you're writing,
Yeah, I can imagine.
but it's kind of weird. Like my husband, he was up there last year. Was it no 2 years ago? And he went through, and I think it was like he was going for a glass of water or something, and it was really late, and it was still daylight out almost. And he thought this was the most fascinating thing he'd seen. So he was out with his camera and he was taking pictures and he sent them to his sister. And she couldn't believe it either, just like how bright and light it was. It was, so that's because we have celebrations around that called the Summer Dim. And that became a motorcycle rally actually up there.
Okay.
And then we have the Shetland Folk Festival music again. That's around the summer and the summer months and all the excitement to do with that. And then, just to break up that long winter, we have the Uphelliah season. And that's always sort of in January, February, March kind of time.
Right.
And every town has their own time that they do their own Uphelliah. So it's like there's a Viking festival that just goes on from like January all the way through to March.
Oh, wow. How fabulous.
So it keeps the island's morale kind of boosted, and and the whole of Shetland shuts down for the Lerwick one. So there's no boats, there's, nobody works except for emergency services, but everyone shuts down and everyone goes out and they support the squad, and it's such a lovely experience. I can't do the 24-hour thing because you technically have to stay up for 24 hours. I could never do it. I will hold my hands up. I would go to the hall and I would last it till about 3 in the morning, and then I'd be like, no, I can't. I'm too tired. I gotta go home and sleep. So even as a teenager, I couldn't hack it. So
mind you, what a wonderful festival! That's such a wonderful thing. I should think also to look forward to, and it's good to celebrate something like that. Yeah.
And unfortunately, my birthday always fell on Uppelia too, so meant that technically my birthday party was in a hall with lots of people I didn't know celebrating Uppelia.
But you're going to have a big party, so I suppose it's good for that.
Yeah, my grandmother was always very good at telling everybody that her granddaughter's birthday was that day, so made it more interesting than it needed to be. I wanted to sit in the corner, read my book, and my grandmother had other ideas.
No, you're celebrating.
Yeah, go up and dance with these young guys, and I'm like, I remember them from school. No thanks, Nan. Can I go serve soup or something? I just wasn't one for that kind of stuff. But she ran the halls every year. How she did it, I admire her for it, but I don't know how she did it. She's just a crazy woman. So tell us a little bit more about the Beekeeper's War, because that sounds really interesting and exciting.
Okay, so yes, the Beekeeper's War, as I said, it's in two parts. So there are these two friends, Prue and Jean, and they're nurses, and they go to Dorset. They're both from Jersey, and they go to Dorset as nurses, and they work in this hospital. And it's one of those family hospitals where the families give their beautiful stately home, as they did back in the First World War, to wounded soldiers and that sort of thing. But there's a very important patient who's brought in, and that's their youngest son, Monty. The other two, the older sons, have been killed in the war, so he's obviously extra special to them. And this American Air Forceman, he was in the Royal Flying Corps then, but he was, and this friend, Jack Garland. And he's the hero of the book. And he comes in to meet his friend Monty and that sort of thing. And he meets Prue, one of the nurses, and they fall in love. And then Jean, the other nurse, falls in love with Monty, the son. And it's that story that sort of develops. There's something quite mysterious about Jack, and something dreadful happens. Of course, I always have something dreadful happening. And the second part of the book is in the Second World War, and it's about Prue and her daughter Emma now. And the second part starts with the invasion of the Channel Islands by the German forces, and her daughter is evacuated and goes to stay in Dorset with her Auntie Jean and Uncle Monty, their beautiful home, and they're now Lord and Lady of the Manor. But her mother stays behind, and it's what happens there. And I loved writing it. This book almost wrote itself, actually. I've always wanted to write a book with a folly in it. I'm fascinated by follies. And there's a folly in this book that plays quite a big part. And I've always loved the idea of a walled-in garden. I don't have one. I probably never will. But I have a walled-in garden in this, with this mysterious beekeeper chap who the daughter Emma meets, and realises he's actually somebody rather more interesting than just one of the gardeners at this place. So it was lovely to write. I really, really enjoyed it. All my historicals actually do tend to, I only realise now I'm writing my next book, they tend to have nurses in it, which I suppose, there were a lot of nurses in the First World War. It was one of the things women shone to and did so incredibly well. So yes, all of them have had. But I find it fascinating that people, so in the Poppy Fields, one of my other books for HarperCollins, that was a time slip, and that was about two nurses. So it was about a nurse in the First World War and one who lives now, and it was set around a house. The connection to them was this house in France, And again, the girl in the contemporary part of the book, she was from Jersey, and she was a nurse as well, and suffered burnout and just had to leave her job for a while. And her father had this old farm that he'd inherited, and said, "Look, go to France and do up this house for me, give you something to do and get away from yourself." And she found these letters and that sort of thing. And that was fabulous, because you sort of, I'm not a nurse, I have no nursing experience, but obviously you do as much research as you can. And one of the best contacts I have from that was in the contemporary side of the book. There's this handyman who comes and helps to do up the house, but he's actually an ex-army vet, and he's got a prosthetic leg, and you think, oh, am I writing this correctly? And this chap contacted me. He's a historian. Was in the army. His partner is a nurse, and they were both saying how well it was written, that sort of thing. It's like such a relief when you hear that sort of thing. Oh, yeah. I'm glad, but obviously must have got that right, because you can only do your best, can't you? When you're researching, exactly. Like you with your grandma, there's only so much and so much research you can do, and obviously you can imagine what the emotions are. For an island at war, one thing that was a help was the pandemic, because living on an island, I couldn't go anywhere. And my daughter, I've got 2 grown children. My son lives in Japan. And so I haven't actually seen him for 3 years now because of the pandemic. He's coming over in a couple of months. And my daughter, she lives in London. And I can research and I can try and imagine what it must have felt like to people living there then. But what I didn't realize was the waves of sort of grief of not knowing when I'll see my children next, and not knowing when because this is an island that is only 9 by 5 miles in size, I mean, I love living here very much.
Oh, I know.
But you do want to get away sometimes, don't you?
A whole of Shetland shut down, so we couldn't even island hop. We were stuck on one
Yeah, we couldn't. We couldn't go anywhere, and no one could come here. Yeah, you were stuck here. And it was so strange. And we had, we had RAF planes, because if, probably the same as you, we get our food, we grow potatoes and tomatoes, and we have Jersey milk and butter and that sort of thing. But, if there is a storm and they stop the boat, we don't get food. And I remember saying to my husband, why is that huge plane? It was this huge RAF plane. It used to circle and then sort of come into land but not land and then go off. He said they're doing exercises. And it's because if there is a storm and we can't get any food, we will starve. So we have to obviously get food delivered. And it was there, and it gave you comfort that obviously plans are in place to sort this out. So although it was a difficult time to write, because I like with everybody, you're worried about things and your family and stuff, it really helped the sense of isolation. And I mean, I didn't have the fear. I didn't have German officers billeted in my home. So obviously I didn't have that sort of thing, but it helped the basic sense of stuff, of missing my children, not knowing when I'll see them again, knowing that if something happened, I couldn't really go to them or anything like that. So it really, really helped with that. So that was actually very good in that respect. So I think, with all the research you do, as I said, there's only so much you can do, but you can go to your more baser feelings of, how would I feel about this, or how would I feel about that? Yeah. And then sometimes things happen and you really think, actually, it's quite different to that, or like with me.
I mean, I found that, because I was actually home in Shetland when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So, we're 64 islands spread out. And these other islanders couldn't get onto the mainland at all. So they were having to have food delivered into the islands. Mm-hmm. And we had a big RAF plane that just sat in our airport. And we had, in the middle of all this, of course, Russia decides to do a flyover.
Mm.
So then we had British Air Force planes flying up to meet them. And we're like...
That must be really frightening.
No, it happens a lot, actually.
Oh, gosh.
If you don't see a Russian naval vessel nearby the islands, you kind of think, what are they up to? Because you get so used to seeing them.
You know where they are, I suppose.
Yeah, and the thing that people forget about Shetland is they are tied to Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Russia, because those were the islands that used us as a hub. So everything
Oh, okay.
traded through Shetland. And even now, looking back on it, we were taught little bits of Russian in school. And that
Okay.
was in case Russian boats came in and we needed to help them, or we needed to understand, that we weren't being invaded. Um,
Makes sense.
and we did. We had Russian boats that would pop up in the harbor and they would totally bypass the radar system, which I never really got the point of if they could get by it. And they would just sort of show up in the town and say, "Hey, we're in for supplies," or and a lot of the fishing boats would trade with them out at sea because ocean life, you have different rules. Especially seamen. If you're out in the ocean, then you take care of each other, no matter what flag you belong to. And my grandfather was a great believer in that, even though he would come in muttering about them, something awful, in his own little Shetland way, stomp in and be like, "I ran into her," "Get the kettle on, I'm just angry." And I would just sort of laugh at him because here's this fisherman who's completely white haired in a big blue boiler suit with a greasy, never washed hat that he would pull off his head because my mother couldn't stand the thing. And he would sit at the kitchen table and he would mump and he'd grump about some boat he'd ran into, trying to get his mackerel or his salmon for the year. And sometimes he'd come in with these great wads of fish. I grew up on fish, all this kind of fresh fish that used to come in. And he would bring it in and the house would stink for days of nothing but fish. My mother used to actually have to hang the washing outside on the line, even though it would be like 60-mile-an-hour winds. The stuff was dry really quick because we didn't have trees where we were. So,
Oh,
yeah, it is so weird going through Shetland and not seeing trees anywhere. Like, we have trees, but they're like bushes compared to the trees on the mainland.
I suppose that's because of the such a strong winds.
Yeah, it's the strong winds and it's actually the salt air.
Oh,
Because we're literally from all sides surrounded and there's never enough daylight for the trees, it kills the trees off. So we've
oh.
had to actually have special tree surgeons come up to Shetland to try and kind of limit the damage the wind does, because it's insane just how much it does.
Fascinating. That's not something from someone like me who doesn't come from there or know it at all. That's something that is quite fascinating, not anything I'd have ever thought of.
And it's weird because when you're up there and you cannot go anywhere on the island without seeing the ocean. It gets a bit suffocating after a while, to be fair. No matter where you go, the freaking ocean's like a shadow. And you would always get this super bitter wind that no matter how many layers you had on, it would cut straight through it and you'd just
Ooh.
be like, okay, today is not a nice day. And you used to get a lot of those days. And then of course when my husband moved up, he loves the cold. He adores cold weather. And he moved up and of course they had the heat wave.
Oh
Hottest
no.
weather that Shetland had had in like 50 or 60 years. And he's lying there and the sweat's pouring off him because all Shetland houses are all windows practically because they want to get as much daylight as they can. And my mum's house was so good for holding the heat in that we were actually dying in the pandemic because the heat was
It
just
wasn't made for that.
unbearable.
Yeah.
And even my dad, when they did the lockdown, he actually stayed home because he wasn't sure if he could go to work or what the situation was with me. I was high risk, so they were trying to figure out how this was going to work. And so he stayed home, and even he was just couldn't handle the heat of the house. Even going outside, I'd never lived a day in my life in Shetland where you sat outside and there wasn't a lick of air. There was not
Crikey,
a
how
single breeze
incredible.
to be had. And we were just melting. And there's no air conditioning in Shetland houses either because we never had any need for that.
No, of
So we've all
course.
got the whole of the fans that was in Tesco's was gone on the first day, you know.
I can imagine.
And we went to get one, and then I'm like, should have bought one before I came up the road because we were melting. So we spent the first year up in Shetland, and then we moved back to the mainland. And of course, the second year was the second worst heat wave that we'd had, and I spent that in the hospital, and the AC didn't work.
Oh no, awful.
So I was like,
Just
I,
think that, didn't
yeah, and I was just sort of lying in the ward thinking to myself, I can't bloody
you? Oh,
believe that the heating's on
no,
and it's
horrible.
like 32 degrees outside.
Oh, no, no, that's too awful.
Yeah, so we had the
Hospitals
fans
tend to be
going.
quite warm anyway, don't they?
Yeah, but
You all want to be
these
in
are
more in the
like
heat
super
wave.
new hospitals, so they're supposed to have the air conditioning in it. So if it does get too warm, you can turn like the air on.
Yeah.
But we had like our windows open to the hilt, and there wasn't a lick of breeze coming in through the window. And I just remember saying to Ian, I'm like, I'm a puddle, I'm a puddle. Like
It's
every day it
horrible.
was just so hot. It was just unbearable. So yeah, but pandemic was great for me in that regard because I had sort of walked away just before the pandemic because I'd kind of become disillusioned in writing because I'd struggled and struggled and struggled for so many years, and I was with all these independent publishers who then started closing their doors because the market got really tight. And I kind of just went, not off it, but I was at burnout stage.
Yeah.
And I was like, why am I struggling to do something? Yes, I love it, and yes, it's my life, but this doesn't make sense. So I walked away, and of course, when I walked away, I went back to working with children with disabilities, something that
Okay.
I'd done a lot of as a volunteer as a teenager. And of course, what happened? Pandemic. I think it was a sign to say, hey, you're not allowed to walk away from writing.
Yeah, get back there and get on with it.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's how it felt. It really did. And
Yeah.
I wrote two novels, and I've been sort
Wow.
of editing this past year, trying to get ready for getting myself back out there almost. And one of the ones that I will be trying to get back out there is that historical one. And it's not a historical romance. It's very much a historical story
Yeah.
of this family, and in a sense them trying to keep standards up, but also to do with the war and the fact the war is ripping that away from their very fibre of their lives, and sort of forcing the menfolk to be in danger, and what that could mean for these girls that are growing up in that. And then of course the mum who's still trying to enforce these standards, thinking this war is going to be over in a month, and they'll go back to their everyday lives. So it kind of, in a way, the pandemic helped because I had that kind of sense of, oh, it'll be over in a month.
Yes.
2 more months, it'll be fine. And that way where you keep kind of
Yeah, and you just
saying
have to
it's,
keep going and keep going.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's going to end, it's going to end. You kind of start to feel like it's never going to bloody end.
Yeah. I'm so glad I didn't know it'll go on for so long. Exactly.
I know, 2 years is a long time.
It's a long time. And I remember my husband saying in the March, because my daughter had to cancel coming here and I had to cancel going there, he said, I'm sure it'll be over by Liberation Day, which is May the 9th. And I
Yep.
remember saying, May, I can't keep going like this till May. I mean, May, how
Yep.
long? I thought, thank heavens I didn't realise.
No, I mean, my dad did the same thing. He said to me, he's like, oh, it'll be over by summer. Oh,
Yeah,
it'll be over by October. And I kept saying, I eventually said to him, would you stop saying that? Because every time you say that, they extend it. So, shh.
yes, they do tend to extend it. A friend of mine actually said, and it actually sort of made sense to me. She writes crime, and she said, "This is the weirdest thing." She said, "It's almost like we're living in some sort of thriller. So
Yeah,
the whole world is living in this thriller." And I thought, actually, it is quite like that. We don't know
it
what's
is. Yeah.
happening. We don't know what's happening next. We don't know when it's going to end and how this will sort of turn out. Yeah,
I
a
felt like we
very
were all
strange
living in a
time.
book. Yeah. And I mean, I actually worked a little bit on kind of a YA thriller, which was a new area for me because I'd never gone into that before. But the pandemic almost sparked Test Zone. And then I kind of stopped writing it when Ukraine happened because I felt kind of like it was a bit close to the bone,
Yeah,
because it was that idea of this small town outside of Chicago is just sleeping. It's winter. It's all peaceful and quiet. And then they're surrounded. Their little town's surrounded, and then they're bombed. And they're bombed with these chemical weapons. And it's about kind of this little teenage girl who suddenly gets sucked into the science of trying to figure out how to save her town. But she's also got to go out there and help rescue people and get them back to this laboratory that's been set up to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And during this journey, she finds out it's happened other places, but nobody knows about it because the media blacked it out and didn't report on it. So it's kind of that. It was a very good thriller to work on, but at the same point, when I saw the Ukraine thing, I just went, this is not a book that's going to get touched anytime soon.
Yes,
so
because the people, it's what people can actually cope with, isn't it? I know when I sent the outline to my publisher for this next book that I'm now actually working on, my next historical, she said, I really love the outline and everything else. She said, but she wanted me to change like a couple of bits. She said, we need more light than shade. And she said, I don't think people can actually take too much darkness right now. And I thought, actually, that's true. I then read a book completely unrelated to anything, and it was quite dark. And I thought, I actually need the lightness as well, so I can see what she means by readers needing a bit more light. So I've had to change certain aspects of it before I wrote it. But yes, I can see that. Yeah.
And it's the first book that I've actually been in process of writing and just taken and shelved it.
Yeah.
Which is a huge
you can always
step
come back to it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when the war's over and things settle down again, then I'll take it out the mothballs and I'll be like, okay, I'll run with it.
Yeah, there's so much suffering there. It's such a terribly sad thing.
It's needless.
It's so awful, heartbreaking.
And I think it's reminding a lot of Europe of the war.
Yeah.
The Second World War. And I think Poland particularly is having those flashbacks to that. And they're kind of living in fear of
it's a very frightening
coming.
time for people over there, of course, living so close, to the rest of us. It's well, you think, God, that must be so terrifying, and it's heartbreaking to watch these things. I can't bear to watch the news most of the time, and that's the thing. But living, in a country that surrounds that, I'd be terrified. Poor people.
Yeah, and that's what I thought, and then. Yeah. It was something very striking because a friend of mine, she turned to me and she goes, well, if Ukraine falls, she said, that's them one step closer to us.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, that's a bit too close to home in a way, because I always said to my grandfather, I'd hate to live through a big war where everyone's involved and you're helpless, because you can't go and fight or you can't do anything to help. You're just kind of stuck waiting to see what's going to happen. And my father-in-law, he's ex-service, and he said that too. He's like, he didn't really see a lot of let's defend this country kind of attitude from our side. And he was like, oh, they'll fall. And it was so shocking to me to hear that from somebody like that, where I was thinking, really, is that where all this has come to?
Yeah.
So I'm holding my breath with that to see how it goes. But yeah, I think historical is going to be something a lot of people are going to be reading because it's going to be a lot less scary than everyday life for a little while anyway, if nothing else. So
well, you know what actually happened, don't you? So you know it's a safe place, even though it might be a horrible thing you're reading about. It happened either 100 years ago, but you know what happened. It's not happening now. That
there's a safety in already knowing the outcome, I suppose.
There is.
Yeah,
definitely.
So what book have you read recently that's stuck with you the most?
Oh, I'd have to say The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins.
I've read that, yeah.
Loved it.
I got it as an ARC. See, when it first was coming out.
Wonderful. Lovely.
And I read it, and I struggled with it a little bit because it was on Kindle at the time. And I was having issues with my Kindle no end at the time. And I thought it was really well done. However, I would get confused a little bit every so often with it.
I actually had, I think it does a lot of the time depend on what format you read something, I think, or have something. Because I
Yeah.
actually had an audiobook and I tried about three times, maybe four times to actually listen to it. And I just could not get into it at all. And I thought, oh.
Yep.
And then I read it on holiday, actually. On the plane, I read most of it. And I absolutely couldn't put it down. I loved it. So it was,
Yeah.
I was quite surprised because I thought I am going to try and read this because everyone goes on about how great it is. But I just couldn't get into the audiobook, but I loved it. I actually loved it in paperback, weirdly.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think if I had it in paperback and I wasn't sort of fighting with the Kindle and I wasn't trying to
Yes.
make notes so that I could kind of keep up with the story almost, I would have enjoyed it more because I would have been able to take smaller chunks. With the dyslexia, sometimes that can be an issue where
Yeah.
you read too much and then you kind of lose where you're at because the words start playing around and you know you need to put it down, take a break or whatever. And I found screens are the worst for that for me. So I have to
Yeah.
read things in hardback form just so that I can get through it. And I've also, I think, they were saying that I might have this thing where I'm better with colors. So see
Oh,
if a page is like sort of yellowed from
is that
age.
Erland's?
I think something like that. Yeah, yeah,
My nephew has that, and he had such a struggle with English and with reading and stuff like that. And he
yeah,
has now these glasses which have it's a yellow tip. There's yellow, green, red. There's different ones I gather, and they
yeah,
tested him yellow, and he said because the words were doing all this,
yeah.
um, so it was very difficult for him to actually focus on it, and it made a marked difference for him. Yeah,
Yeah, I just got told, oh, you've got dyslexia at a really young age, and then that was it. Like they took me to extra support classes and then just forgot about me in a way. And then handed me a scribe when I had high school and said, right, get on with it. And I was like, oh, okay.
yeah.
You know, it was almost like a fight back in those days just to stay in mainstream education because if you were,
Yes, I think now there's sort of people understand an awful lot more, don't
yeah.
they?
And it when I went back in as an assistant for kids with disabilities, I was so surprised at how much training they were getting and how much support they were getting. But it still baffled me that they didn't understand how to work with colleagues that were disabled.
Really? How
Yeah,
strange.
that totally blew my mind because I had said to them before going in, I said, like, I'm disabled, I'm registered disabled. I said, so there's things that I won't be able to do. And it was almost like it just went clean over their heads and they hired
How
me
bizarre.
and
That's
I
so
thought,
strange.
oh, okay, they'll understand. No, they really didn't. And it
You
was,
really
you
would
know,
would have
it
expected
went from
to.
being they understood and I worked really hard, and then lockdown hit, and I had to work from home because I was high risk. And then I came back, and they treated me completely different because they had been in the school, and I hadn't been able to be in the school. So it was almost like I don't want to say jealousy that they thought I was at home doing nothing. But I was actually at home working, you know, the same hours as they were. I was just working on a computer, which
Yeah.
was harder because, you know, you're going in and out of
Oh,
classes and
yes.
you're chasing students and you're making sure they hand in their homework. And I worked with one student one on one the entire time. And then I come back and we've got a new set of pupils in because it was a new year. And it was so awkward when I went back in and I felt so uncomfortable. And by the time I did get my feet back, I'd fallen really ill and I had to go into hospital. And I said, look, I'm going to be in hospital for 3 weeks. And they said, oh, would you mind resigning then?
I didn't think you could do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I kind of, in a way, with this show, is I can talk about it and be like, hey, a little bit more understanding if you're taking somebody on with an invisible disability that is a long-term health condition. Make sure you understand that
Yeah.
before you go down that road because there's nothing worse for somebody who's working really hard and then for you not to be able to understand that they need maybe that time to get better. They need that time to heal. You need to kind of work and go, work with people, go back and forth with people.
Absolutely.
And that's another great thing for this show is authors. There's so many authors that come on and they do either have dyslexia or they've got a long-term illness or they've got long COVID, as some cases may be. And it kind of breaks that down a little bit and it takes that stigma away.
Yeah.
And it's defunking a lot of the myths as well, because I think a lot of people think, oh, if you're disabled, you can just go write a book. And it's not like that at all. You really have to have discipline and you need to make it your lifestyle and your choice and really work at it. And I keep telling myself that almost like it's okay to want to do this for a living. It's okay to want to sit and do podcasts and talk to people.
Yeah.
And it's been a learning curve because I've done 17 interviews since I started doing this. Right. Sometimes I'm recording 2 or 3 times a day just so that I can, because everyone's got some really seriously weird schedules and I'm just sort of trying to fit in around everybody. And then when I do take a night off, it turns out that my electronic diary is not working. And I was like, because, it came in saying I had nothing on and I was like, okay, this is all right. And then I was like, oh, when I went back, I checked and found that 30 authors had their appointments moved.
Shed somewhere.
Yeah, so I was just like, okay. So, and now I double check everything. It's ridiculous, but it's been such an adventure. I've really enjoyed it so far. So I hope it keeps going. I hope so.
I'm sure it will.
So if you had time and you could just sit and read and enjoy and you didn't have those stresses of deadlines and, all the lovely stuff that we have as writers, who would you sit and enjoy and why?
I suppose, you mean as in people?
Well, authors or a series or something like that. You can have an author and a series.
Well, I have so many. I mean, I don't know how many, probably 300 or 400 books on my Kindle.
I think we're all like that actually now.
I know. I mean, I'm a member of the RNA, sort of Romantic Novelists Association, and every Tuesday, for example, there's you put up the hashtag Choose News and RNA tweets, so from the RNA, and it's like a day where we can all promote it's on Twitter or promote a book or something. So there'll be about sort of 60 people doing it, and we each we put up one of our books, and then we sort of retweet everybody, and maybe put a comment or whatever. And I look at every single one before I tweet them, and I end up buying several every single time. And I think I keep buying these books, and I've got such a deadline. I mean, I've got 3 deadlines. I'm writing 3.5 books this year. And I don't know when I'm going to be reading these books. So I suppose more time to read, really, but I'm not exactly sure what, because I have so many. I mean, at the moment, I've got 3 books on the go because I read a paperback in the bath. So I'm reading one of the Bridgeton books, the 3rd book, An Offer from a Gentleman, by Julia Quinn, at the moment in the bath. I can't remember what I've got on my Kindle. And I've got another book. It's A Woman's Courage, I think it is, on audio. And I listen to that when I'm driving or when I'm going, like lying in bed, sort of trying to get my brain to go to sleep, relax a bit, or first thing in the morning. So I tend to go between 3 books all the time. And
you're a lot like me in that regard. I have a book for the bath, a book for the car, and a book for bed. And my husband does not understand. I rotate between all 3. Yeah.
And I do review, I'm a member of, there's 3 of us, 3 local authors, well, there's loads of local authors here actually, but we called ourselves the Blonde Plotters. We actually set up an online literary festival that did extremely well, but then with the pandemic, it was called My VLF. It was we actually won an award at Future Books in London, and there was nothing like it. We interviewed so many authors. We actually did the Big Book Weekend with BBC Arts in 2020. I mean, I think we interviewed something like 320 authors at the same time as writing our own books. And one of us also works in a senior role. And by the end of the year, we did 6 of our own festivals. We did a historical festival, a romance festival, a horror festival, all different things. And we did, I think, about 5 other literary festivals. which was fantastic. It is what we set it up for, but we didn't actually expect to be so successful. And in the end, we had to do, we couldn't do everything. And for
Yeah.
me, writing is, what I want to
Everything.
do, what I've aimed for so long, and what I love. It's my passion. And it is the other two as well. So we had to make a really difficult decision just to close it down, which was really, really hard because it worked hard to set it up.
Yeah.
You just can't actually do everything.
I know I'm one of these people. I'm a bit like you where I've started, I was studying and then I was writing and then I was convalescing and now, I'm writing, studying and doing a podcast. So
Yeah.
it's like, I don't know what made me think, hey, what's a good idea? I've got a little bit extra time. I'm going to take on a podcast.
I
Like,
can do this as well. Yeah.
yeah, that's my horrible little habit. And of course, there's so much other stuff that I do as well. And, being the fact that I started as a wrestling writer, I'm so used to running around like a headless chicken that I feel like if I'm not running around like a headless chicken, I'm not doing something right.
Yeah.
And then,
I know.
it was like the weirdest experience today. I told Shane Helms, who's a good friend of mine, and he's a producer now for WWE, but he wrestled in WWE his entire life. I said to him, I said, you're the only reason I'm doing this podcast because the first ever podcast I ever listened to was his. And his was actually a live broadcast on, it was like a Twitch kind of thing. And you could sit in the chat room and you could talk to him and ask questions and he would interact with everybody that was talking to him. And I got so addicted to those shows that I missed them when he wasn't doing them.
Yeah.
And I ended up, he had a kid, which was the reason that it slowed down. And I ended up deciding, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And of course, the podcast thing sort of kind of slowly came to life. And yeah, I would never have done this if he hadn't been such a driving force behind it.
Oh, that's nice.
And
Though.
he's such an inclusive person that he almost made me realize I need to do this for every author that, who's either it has to be a bestseller. It could be a brand new author coming out. I did that yesterday. I had Lindsay Maple on, who's a brand new fantastic author, and it's called, she's doing a book that's not your average love story or something along that lines. And it's a very different comedy. It's a romantic comedy. So it's light and it's fluffy and it's easy going, but it does have some steam to it. And I thought, here's a young woman who's a yoga instructor and does all this other stuff. She deserves that podcast time. And so I started with that, and then I've had bestsellers on, some I've known for a while, some of I haven't known, and I'm just sort of building it around everybody. And I don't care what genre you write, as long as you love what you do and you love your craft. That's
it's
the most
passion,
important thing,
isn't it?
Yeah. And it's good because we get to talk about all this little crazy writing tips and stuff that we've tried, or books that we're reading and we're slightly addicted to, or more addicted to than maybe we should be. And the readers kind of get to explore, realize that maybe if we write a genre, that doesn't mean that we're sitting reading it. That we like.
I think an awful lot of the time people, I do love historical fiction, but I know quite a few like romantic fiction authors who really love reading crime, but they write the most beautiful, cozy romantic fiction. And it's like, really? So, yeah, you do need a sort of breakthrough. I know, like with mine, by the time I've written, I love research, but the time I've written this historical I'm writing now, I will go on to a Georgina Troy contemporary romance, and I love doing that. And it's like having a bit of a break from the previous one. And then by the time I've done that, I'd be yearning to go and do some research and do a historical again. So it's nice to do, the two different genres.
It's nice to break it up. Yeah. For me, if I'm writing contemporary, I'll go read fantasy. Or if I'm stuck writing fantasy, I'll go read a crime novel, as long as it doesn't interfere with what I'm writing. The only time that I read what I'm writing is when it's a historical that I'm working on, because I've been working on a Viking story, which kind of came from Shetland, and it kind of came from the the rumors and the kind of the gossip of, well, what happened if this was the reason an entire village vanished from the island? Because it's a mystery they're still trying to solve.
Oh,
You know,
fantastic.
there's this village they uncovered underneath the airport, and all that they found was the remains of a man and a wife, and the entire village just looked like it had vanished
God,
completely. No
that's incredible.
explanation, no reason. The animals were still in their stalls, there was food left in bowls. They had no idea what had made them vanish. So the islanders, they were taking all these little facts and making stories about them, and I kind of ran away with one of their idea, well, one of my grandparents' ideas actually. And it was good because I sat and I learned new history drama kind of style writers. I met Elizabeth Cheswick's work for the first time. I grew up on Catherine Cookson, so I wanted it to be a story that's why I didn't change the language in it. I kept it very plain English because I wanted
Mm.
everybody to be able to read it. And I wanted it to be a book that anyone could connect to.
But that's
Um,
fascinating because you've got mystery in there as well as history.
yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah, and I thought the idea of it was the last bloodline of the Viking, princess line, and these three daughters. After the queen gives birth and she passes on through child labor, then this maid who had taken care of her, this shield maiden, and protected her throughout all these years, has to take the girls and flee with them. But it's her job to protect them while they're on the run, and it's essentially them fleeing the Templars, but the whole Templar system isn't corrupt. So half of the Templars are protecting them and half of them are hunting them. And, it's like going into the history of the Norwegian royal family and how all of a sudden they had these royals that nobody knew suddenly appeared. And they were like, oh, there, this is a princess, and she's fine. And I just sort of thought, well, how awesome would that be if the Viking bloodline didn't end and they actually lived on within the Netherlands and in Finland and in Denmark, and they kind of the story of their lives kept going, but it was the biggest secret ever kept, and I went for it.
Oh, good for you. That sounds fabulous. I mean, that's what makes a really interesting book when, I think that happens with authors, isn't it? I think,
Yeah,
but what if this happened? And what if they did that instead? And yeah,
yeah.
fabulous.
And I mean, okay, it's not published. I will say that, but it's one that I'm editing and I'm working on, and hope one day it publishes. But I love the idea of it being, it's not the usual historical that you'd
Yeah.
find, because it is literally drawn out of the history of an island that isn't really explored, and I kind of run with it. And I think what might be kneecapping me is the fact I haven't changed the language. I've kept it. I wanted everybody to be able to read it, so I used standard everyday language to try and keep it so that anybody of any reading language could read it and understand it, and it wouldn't get lost. And I think that's where maybe some of the editors struggle, because it is that kind of standard English so that everyone can read it, and it's not using olden day English or olden day um you know terms and phrases, because I didn't want to cut every audience out, so it was
Yeah,
only a
I wouldn't
historical
have thought
drama.
that should be a problem though.
I've had a few rejections because of that, which I thought
Because
was
of it.
very
Oh, right.
interesting. And I got a couple of rejections and I stopped submitting it, because to me it was a story that I'd written because I was passionate about it. It wasn't a story I'd
Mm.
written to make money, or, I just wanted other people to enjoy it.
But sometimes there's different ways in my to be published. Sorry, I didn't finish the sentence. For example, so I wrote Broken Faces, which was my first historical. It's about four friends in the First World War. One of them received life-changing injuries, two guys and two women. And I wrote that book because I was looking for something to read. When you just
Yeah,
want to find something to read, and I actually just couldn't find exactly what I wanted. And I thought, I'm actually going to tell myself this damn story. So I did.
yeah,
And I wrote this. It's quite big. I wrote this book. And again, I tried and tried and tried to get it published. It was actually, I entered it into the Good Housekeeping novel writing competition, and it was runner up. So it beat 7,000. I was told it beat over 7,000 other people. Through that, I got my first agent. He was one of the judges.
Oh, wow.
But he didn't sell it. I think, unfortunately, Rich and Judy had 2 books out that were similar sort of stories, but the 2 together sort of made my one, I think. Anyway, I thought I'd missed my chance because I thought, that was in 2012, thought 1480. No one's going to read about that afterwards. Obviously, I'm wrong. And eventually my husband said, why don't you just self-publish it? I don't want to self-publish. I want to be published and all that. But I self-published. And that's how I got my HarperCollins contract. One of the publishers there actually read it. She was looking to commission a historical novel to commemorate the centenary of the end of the First World War.
Yeah.
And she contacted me and she said, I don't know how you are with with contracts or anything. This is what I'm looking for. I want to commission something. I've loved Broken Faces. And I was wondering if you'd be interested. And it literally took me less than a second to say, yes. And that was
of course.
Field. Yeah, that was a Poppy Field. And that's a USA Today bestselling. Well, and it is literally, that book alone made the difference between me working for a living, doing a job I didn't want to do, to working full-time as an author. It was my dream. And I still write historicals for her. But it was self-publishing that book. So that book, it was run up in a national competition. It got me a top agent. I thought, oh my God, this is it now.
The dream,
And it didn't work. It didn't happen. We parted ways, and very amicably, but we did. And then, so I self-published, and I thought, well, I don't care. I've done it. I've got this out there. People did like it. And then she read it. And really the rest is history for me.
It's amazing how
you just don't know. So, you just don't know.
Well, for me, I had a big break. I had a sort of a mainstream one in England, an English publisher, and they gave me a traditional contract, and it was for Marie's World. So twin sisters turning on each other, and one twin publishes her twin's diaries.
Oh, wow.
To the world. So you can just imagine the chaos that causes.
Yeah.
And it was the ripple effect on it. And I sold out everywhere I went. And I thought, this is it. And then the publisher said, we're not going to publish any more of it.
Oh, no, that's heartbreaking.
And I was gutted because I'd gone and I'd done this book tour and it had done really well. And then we had to part ways with them. And I went back to the indie world. And I had unfortunately gotten entangled with a bad agent, and I ended up with burnout. And I've been doing this 13 years, and I've never had a company that I've clicked in with and I thought, I'm going to stay here forever. There's never been that feeling of coming home. So I've always kind of been on the look for to do that. And I'm not an author that writes one genre. I don't want to be sports romance for the rest of my life. I want to be able to write other stuff. And I've written a crime book, and I've written with a detective out of a TV show from America, of all things. And I've written historical dramas, and I've written all this other stuff that I want to really explore. And I don't want to be just known for the girl that wrote that wrestling book with a wrestler that kind of started off the sports romance genre. It's just that kind of way that I'm edging out.
That you can actually, I mean, I've been published in 3 names with 3 publishers. And I think, again, so I wrote also writers, I haven't because I haven't got time now to, but I did write Azella Drummond, 2 thrillers. And again, they didn't sell when they were with my agent, but they were picked up by Hero Books. And they did quite nicely. They were wonderful to write for. And then I was also published with my Georgina Troy, my contemporary romances, with a small indie publisher, quite a big indie publisher, I suppose. And then eventually I got my rights back, and I self-published those for a good few years, really enjoyed it. And now I've sold my backlist and 4 frontlist books with Boldwood Books. So I think there's loads of different ways of doing it. I think back in the day, certainly when I sort of started, you had to find an agent first, and then you had to find a publisher, and you had
it's a long process.
Whatever. It's very different now, and I think now it can be a lot of different things.
I totally agree with that.
I love the indie side of things, but I love being traditionally published. and I like
Yeah.
writing different genres. I think you can be a lot of different
You can
things
wear a
now.
lot of hats. Yeah, I would
Totally,
definitely agree with that.
totally.
So, is there an author that inspired you, past and present, to A, start writing, and B, who started you reading?
I think I loved Julie Cooper's books when I was sort of about 16, 17. Her like Prudence and Octavia and Lisa and Co. And those books, they were sort of like romances with like really gorgeous sort of heroes and stuff like that. And then I discovered Jackie Collins, who I just thought was a goddess. I loved all her books. Um, so many really, but those were the two right in the beginning. Those were
Yeah.
the two in the beginning. Um, yeah, I mean, now if I can't even think now because I just, I now have so many friends who are authors and I love supporting friends and stuff like that. Um, but I mean,
It's
the
hard though
historical,
when you have like so many that's your friends
many,
and
but
you
they're
just get.
so fabulous. Funny enough, a couple of one more chapter authors that I'm close to. There's Glynis Peters. She writes historicals,
Yep.
fabulous. She's very big, especially in Canada and the States. And Christy Barlow, and she writes contemporary romance series. Oh, but they're just so fabulous. It's like a whole world. She's got the Love Heart Lane series. I think it's going to go
Yeah.
about 15 books now. And
Wow.
she I don't know if she did this map or I think this artist did this map for her of where it's different sort of families. Um, so there's like Love Heart Lane, which I think is Little Guest House. I've read them so many over the last couple of years. They're just absolutely fabulous. And Starcross Manor. So there's different places and different stories with each book. And there's this map, and she had it done, and she's got it on her. She's got an outside studio as well, writing studio, and it's on the wall, and it just looks so fabulous. But you know that if you read, you know what you're going to get when you read their books, don't you? That's
Yeah.
what's so wonderful about a favorite author. You know you're going to love their book, and you know what you're going to get, and be thoroughly entertained. I mean, another one, Terry Nixon. She writes the most incredible historical fiction. Absolutely amazing. Um, so many though, so many.
I must admit, when I need a good sort of kick up the butt and get writing again, I read Catherine. I
Yeah,
read
I
Catherine
love Catherine.
Cookson.
You can't go wrong with Catherine Cookson, can you?
No, but you know she's fading away. That unless you're British, okay, this is what I've
Right.
discovered. Unless you're British or Australian, people don't really know her anymore, and it
Oh,
sads me. It
really?
saddened me. So I have this little banner where I do talk about her as much as I can because I'm like, I gotta keep her alive, you know? This woman
Oh, I
got me
think her
into
books are just
writing and
they're
I
no,
have to.
just fabulous,
I mean, to think
fabulous.
she was dyslexic.
Oh, was
You
she?
wouldn't have thought it,
No, you
but she
wouldn't.
was.
No, I
Yeah.
would never have
And
known
she
that.
wrote, the reason that she wrote in the style she did was because of her dyslexia. So she actually wrote how she would speak and what her experiences were from being a servant in a big house and sort of coming up that way. And that's what made her book so special, was because she was working class and she understood the struggles of being working
Yeah,
class and what every penny meant to everybody in working class. And I adored her for that. I really did. And I think at a time where in Shetland we were transitioning between the oil and the fishing. So it was such a sort of spiotic period of where lots of people had money and then lots of people didn't have money, and it was that kind of fluctuation. She kind of made it feel level and less dramatical in a way.
yeah,
And she helped me understand the world because I was going from hospital to school, hospital to school. And she kind of gave me a bit of perspective on that. And her own struggles with mental health kind of tied in with mine, and it made sense to me. If you ever get a chance to read Hamilton by her, that is an incredible book, and
really.
it's about a woman who's just has no control over her life, and she's so miserable that she creates this comical horse that just appears, and it gets her through these awful times. And I can't think of like who would come across something like that other than her, and it just worked so well. And it
Yeah,
totally was
yeah.
not what I
Somebody
thought I was
really
getting into when
understands
I
and
read it.
speaks to people through that. Yeah,
Yeah, and she wrote that when she was going through her worst time, and I thought to myself, that's such an incredible thing, and she got 3 books out of it. That whole idea, three novels, it was incredible. And I read them, and funnily enough, I read them while I lived in Hamilton in Scotland, so it kind of felt really strange a little bit, because here's this horse called Hamilton, and I'm actually living
And
in a
that's where
place
you're
called
living.
Hamilton. It's like,
Wow.
but yeah, she taught me so much, and she taught me so much about writing, and you were guaranteed if you got a book from her, it was a professional story. Even her
Always.
short stories were done so well. So she's my kick up the butt book. I always say when I
That's
need
so nice.
yeah,
It's lovely
I
to have
need
a
a little
go-to
bit
book,
going.
isn't it? Or
Yeah,
author.
it's good. It's interesting. So, what genre do you feel drawn to when you visit bookstores or you're looking at books online?
Always historical fiction. I'll always go to that first. Yeah, fascinating.
Yep,
I
hands
love
down.
history.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's such an easy place to go to. Has there ever been a book that you've picked up and you just were like, why did I start this? I've just gone through this myself. I had picked up a science fiction for my university course. I have not a clue what it was about. I still don't understand it, and I've read, my teacher's notes on chapters and stuff to try and understand it, and I've not a clue. Not a clue. And I was like, why did I start this? Because I'm not mathematical minded.
Oh,
And it
no.
was a very social political book, and that's totally out of my wheelhouse. So yeah, I kind of asked this question because I'm interested to see if there is people that have done that kind of thing like me, where you've either been studying or you've done it for whatever reason, it's book club or something, and you've picked it up and you've read it, and then you're like, oh, I have no idea what any of this means.
No, not really. I could. There must be. There absolutely must be, but I just couldn't think of one. Um, but yeah, I mean, I didn't go to university, so I don't have that sort of. I know some of the things my children studied, and you think, why would anyone put that on the prospectus,
The
because that
curriculum,
sounds
yeah,
so incredibly dull. I mean, I know for a
yeah,
lot of, they're now GCSEs, aren't they? But in my
yeah,
day it was O levels. Mine were fine, but I know with my children, when they were at school, you think, I'm not surprised a lot of kids don't want to read, because the things they are introduced to at school are either really sad or quite horrible, or very, very dull. I know my
yeah,
son didn't read for years, and then he went traveling some with a friend, and he picked up, or his friend suggested he read Fatherland by Robert Harris,
yeah,
and he loved it and discovered that actually books don't have to be boring. And
yes,
he's been an avid reader ever since. I mean, he is an avid reader. If he's not reading, um, he's listening to audio. But he actually teaches English to Japanese children now in Japan.
yeah,
And he just cannot get enough of books. But for years, I couldn't get him to pick up a book, because
yeah.
what he'd been given, at school, it was like, why would you even want? I wouldn't want to read that, you know. And
I
there
know,
you go,
like,
there's supposed to be, I don't know, some form of interest sparked, and there wasn't. Yeah,
yeah, I did Thomas Harding, Far from the Madding Cried was my first book, and of course,
mine was
you
Mayor of
got
Casterbridge.
yeah,
Mayor of but I was lucky actually, because it was also a series on TV at the time, so it helped me get a bit of understanding of the book I was reading, because of how they were
I wish
acting.
I'd done that instead of
Yeah,
trying to struggle
it really,
through.
really helped,
Yes.
and I actually did enjoy it. But I think without that, I probably wouldn't have quite grasped different sort of nuances and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
and it was like there was one that was set in New York about high society. And I must admit that one was it started off really good, and then I kind of like hit a brick wall with it. And I thought, holy, because it was like every book we read for the first 4 months was about domestic abuse in
Oh,
some form.
really?
Yeah. And I was like, trigger warnings, please. Because they gave us, I think it was Othello was one of them. And it's so brutal.
Is it?
And I was like, seriously? And then we were given one that it was Ali Smith's The Hotel World, which was again another really, really confusing book because it was jumping perspectives all the time. So one minute, one chapter you would just get used to this character, and then you'd be in the next character, and then the next character, and you had to kind of understand that all this was tied to a hotel, which you don't really figure out till you get to the very end, and then you're like,
I see.
okay. But yeah, there was quite a few this course that I just could not wrap my head around. I'm about to go into The Tempest. It's my final book for this course, and I'm just, in a way, I'm dreading it a little bit. But then I know I'm okay with William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Because I was an actress growing up as a child. I was a child actor in the local theatre group, and I had directors that were slightly insanely hooked on sort of William Shakespeare. So I did Midsummer's Night's Dream, and I was in the Pied Piper, and all these other sort of weird and wonderful plays that I didn't always understand. But the great thing about it was we broke it down as we were learning it.
And you
So
get a
he
different
taught me how to
understanding of
read
it when you're watching somebody else play that part, I think, as well.
Yeah, and it was good because I learned to understand him a bit better. And also my best friend, she did that as an HND. So when I get really stuck, I can phone her and go,
Oh,
best pal, really need help on this one. And she kind of comes over and she goes, right, what are you not getting? And then I kind of just sort of try and fill in the blanks as I go and sort of say, hey, this is where I get stuck. And it's that kind of camaraderie sometimes with her that gets me, it's getting me through this course sometimes.
Sometimes you just actually need somebody to sort of explain it, Ben. It's like, oh, of course, yeah. Like
Yeah, and
shining
then
a
you're
light
like,
from a different angle or something.
yeah, and then you're like, why didn't I think of that? Yeah,
Yeah.
I have that moment quite frequently. So going into writing, into the portion of the writing kind of elements, what do you do to sort of prepare yourself to kind of dig into your deeper characters or your darker characters, the ones that kind of get in the way of the love stories and, make the story happen?
I think, well, how I always start with my books is I do probably usually about sort of 4 or 5 pages long, like an outline. So I'll have the log line, then I'll have basic sort of very short premise, and then I'll have, the characters, and that's how I sort of work it out first. And I know that I'll obviously want the light and the shade within the book. So you obviously want the people that people would like, and then the people probably they won't like, or, the protagonist, the antagonist, or whatever. And yes, and slowly sort of build it up from there. I usually think I know, I should say, who everybody's going to be and what part they're going to play. But even like today, I was writing a scene and I suddenly thought, oh, there was this one character that was actually connected to another character. Now, you get these light bulb moments and you think,
Yep.
that is perfect. That will make that a deeper level to that. And it's slowly built, almost like a sort of jigsaw puzzle, isn't it? You slowly sort of build up. And as long as you have your internal and your external conflict throughout there, and the characters sort of grow and have their own character arc, and you do have the light and shade. I love writing the sort of badder character, the hard, the nasty ones, probably I should say.
Yeah, I do that too. I do like that.
Yeah,
and
they're fun to write, aren't they?
I like to be organized too. I'm a bit like you. I break every book down chapter by chapter by chapter, so I know where I'm going.
Yeah.
It's only when hubby went and hid my notebook that had like 26 novels in it already pre-broke down, and he can't find it and I can't find it. Yeah, that's the only time when I'm like, yeah. So I'm kind of having to if it's one that somebody asks for, and then I'm trying to reconstruct it really quickly to try and remember what the story was. And luckily, because I haven't written it, I've just broken it down. It stays in my head, so I can reaccess it. But once it's finished and I write the last page, my problem is my brain deletes it. So then I have to sit and I have to read it for the first time as a reader and go through it as a reader, which is, in some respects hilarious.
No, but I do that. I remember being interviewed. I had a book, but I've already moved on to the next book. Well, for example, the book that's coming out in May, I've already written the next book in the series.
Yes.
And I've written another book that's in a totally different genre. And I know I'll have done different, like, structural edits or whatever for the different ones.
Yeah.
I remember one book came out a few years ago and somebody introduced us. So tell us about your hero. So what's your heroine? What's her name? I had no idea at all. I had no idea what her name was. I had no idea what she did. Literally completely gone from my mind. And this thing had literally just come out like 2 weeks before. So I had no idea. Like, how can you not remember? Because I've moved on many times since then.
Because we're always moving forward. And I think when media does this, these interviews with us, they forget that we're maybe 4 or 5 books away from where we were.
Who is that? And I always have to think, oh gosh, no.
I always have to look at my notes.
Yes, always.
That's what I do. Like, bless my husband's socks. I can't drive. So my husband decided to drive me on my book tour. And we were going to stay at hotels on this book tour. And I felt so bad for him because I'm dyslexic. I have to practice pieces that I'm going to read aloud because otherwise I miss words, right? So I must have read him the entire novel from when we left Glasgow till we went round all the different bookshops and got back to Scotland. And he was like, I could do your interviews. I know your book better than you do. And it's so true. He actually did. And, when I couldn't answer a question, he would be mouthing the answers to me.
Yes, and don't you find like you'll sort of say, oh, I thought this character, what do you think about this? And you have, I have with my poor husband, various sort of like conversations, and you'll say about something, say, no, but I thought it was this. And was it? Oh, yes, it was. I completely forgot.
Or mine goes, see if I'm writing a particular thing and I get stuck a lot, I will run the idea by him.
Yeah.
And I use him as a sounding board. And I think that's maybe why he prefers driving buses to being at home with me, because it's like...
Escape.
Yeah, because he's like, oh my gosh, general public's better than when you're writing sometimes, because he gets kind of that... he knows it so well that he's almost like reliving it constantly.
Oh, man.
And especially if there's media going on, he's like...
with him too.
Yeah, and he's like... Yeah, and I made the mistake of letting him read one of my novels, and it was my fantasy novel, and he literally turned to me and he goes, you could have deleted the first 150 pages.
Charming.
Those weren't exciting enough. And I was like, okay then. Not sure how to take that. But that was...
You had that with somebody with... Broken Faces before it was published. I had a one-to-one with an agent, and he said, you do realise that the first 2 chapters you could say in a sentence, you just don't need them, just delete them. And I was horrified. But when I read it again, I thought, he's right. And I ended up deleting the first 2 chapters, and every single thing pretty much covered it in a short sentence. And I thought, oh my God, that was quite an awakening for me. That
yeah, it is. But he's one of the few people that will sit there and ask me why, and he's a great believer in you should be able to answer the question why to everything. Like, why do you pick roses as her favorite flower? Why does she have a cat called Samuel, or what? Whatever it is. And
it's good though, because it makes you think on a deeper level, doesn't it?
And that's how I trained as a wrestling writer, which makes everyone kind of scrunch their head up and go, you're 5'1", you're a wrestling writer. And because what people don't realize is wrestlers need writers to give them the storylines that they go out and then perform. And you're not only convinced, you're not just having to get in their head and understand their character, but you're writing sometimes off the back of other people's writing. And you're kind of trying to keep it going. You're also trying to convince this 6'3" gigantic thing of a man that this is the right move for him, and he's going to enjoy this character, and he's going to enjoy whatever it is you've created because it's going to be worthwhile.
I've never even heard of that before.
No, and it's not easy. And of course, what people don't realize, and I've discussed this quite a lot on this podcast, is wrestling is a very male dominated world backstage. And a lot of people don't think a woman should be backstage at wrestling. So when I turned up for my first ever writing stint, I got asked to go get beer, or I got asked to what I was doing there. I got asked if I was one of the girls that was interested in, being in relationships with them. And I'm like, no, I'm here to write. And then I got a lot of funny looks as if to say, why is there a woman writing our storylines backstage? And
incredible.
I even got asked, would you pretend to be my crazy girlfriend who's discovered I've got a girl in my room? Because he couldn't get rid of the girl from the night before.
Wow.
And of course I did that as a favor to him. But it was shocking to me that they didn't take me seriously as a writer because I was female. And that's still a culture that's very much alive and kicking in wrestling in the bigger companies. And that's another reason that this show is really important, is because I'm kind of almost saying, hey, I studied under Vince Russo. I know you guys are mostly male dominated. Let's change that. Yeah. Let's keep changing things. Let's keep breaking down these glass ceilings. I will probably get a lot of stick when this podcast does start dropping, because people are going to be like, hey, stop calling us on this. Well, I'll stop calling you on it when you stop doing it.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you need somebody that's not really scared to sort of stand up and say, hey. And I walked away from wrestling writing for that reason. And I started writing books, and I kind of almost took the mayhem that I lived backstage and I put it in Marie's world. And that's what everyone connected to, was Makes the mayhem of the characters. Yeah. And that they're so multi-layered and so deep, because I had to be able to answer the questions of why.
Yeah.
So that I could be comfortable with putting it out. And even now, once I've written a book, I look at it and I say, okay, well, why am I doing that? And why is she doing that? And why is... So I can answer it if a fan asks me, or a wrestler asks me, or whoever it is down the line. But yeah, that was probably the best education I ever got. I also got a really good education in how to communicate with people that were like 3 times the size of me and could squash me with their hand. I got nicknamed the Spitfire because I was really quick with my words, but I was also really good at ducking and running. So, now, mental note to girls: do not wear high heels backstage.
No,
not if you want to be able to run. So I learned all these sort of tricks and stuff, and I'm very grateful for that, because I look back on it and I think I went into novel writing with deep point of view from the word go. And I've held on to that with like an iron tight fist, because I know that's what my readers really appreciate. Even if I don't have a huge audience base, I have a little audience base, and the ones that do buy it, every single one of them matters to me.
Yes.
So I try and keep true to them, at least. I try. Is there see, when you came into romance writing, what made you decide that was the genre you were going to put your voice to?
I think I've just always loved reading romance. I think I just have. I think it's the sort of, for example, I used to always love every time Katie Ford had a book out, or Christina Jones or Jill Mansell had books out. It's like a comfort blanket. You know that you're going to have gorgeous heroes and, tough heroines, and, you know that it'll all be all right in the end. And it's like a sort of comfort thing. It's entertaining. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. But, there's nothing to worry about. Ultimately, it will all be all right. And I think, when you go through sort of difficult times, sort of growing up, my teenage years, family breakdowns and stuff like that.
Of course, yeah.
There's different sort of times. And again, later with my own divorce, I got divorced, my children very small. So it's nice to have those places to escape to where, everything's, there's obviously going to be conflict and drama and that sort of thing. You want that, but it will be all right, and it will be comfortable, and it'll, it's lovely.
It gives you hope as well that things will work out in your own life too, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think sometimes we just need that sort of thing, and I know it's
Yeah,
certainly helped me. It is the perfect escape, really, isn't it? A bit of
it really
romance.
is. So
Hmm.
when you write, is it like a movie in your head, or is it a jigsaw puzzle that you're putting the pieces together?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, when I put it together, when I do my outline and originally sort of set it up, it's much more like a jigsaw. But when I write, there will be those times, like I said, where something will occur to me and I'll think, oh, that's wrong, or I must put those together, or something. But when I'm actually typing, when I'm in the zone, I actually don't hear anything or see anything. I see it like a movie unfolding in front of my eyes. I'm not even aware what my hands are even doing. And I just love that. I remember my husband used to work nights. He was a taxi driver. And he said he'd come back to the house. I only had one dog then. And the entire house would be in darkness. And as he sort of came close to the house, there would be one bit of light, and it would have been my laptop. You could see the light
Yeah,
through the windows, my laptop. And because I had no idea that it was pitch black outside, no
yep.
lights are on, I had no idea what was going on because I was completely in this world. And I absolutely love that. I think we're very lucky
Yeah.
as authors to be able to just go into this imaginary world like that's fantastic and live in it for a while, you know. So to me,
I
it's a bit
know,
like
I know
yeah,
for
like
me, yeah. I know for me, like when I'm in hospital, it's my perfect escape.
such an
Except for
escape.
when,
Yeah.
yeah, it's except for when they stick the tubes in my arms and make it impossible for me to reach the keyboard, and then I get all frustrated and grumpy. But yeah, like I spent 3 weeks where I literally didn't sleep for more than an hour, maybe 2 hours a night. Because the stuff they were giving me just kept me awake. It was the
Oh, that
painkillers.
must be so exhausting.
It really was. And it's so draining mentally because I'm going to sleep hot and then I'm waking up drenched. Then I have to get out the bed. Then they change the bed because I've sweated through everything. And then I have to get changed myself. And then they were putting me back in. And writing was like my escape because I'm lying in an ICU ward or I'm lying in HDU. However, I wish HDU had given me my blinking glasses back. I had glasses in a plastic bag and I kept making the, because I couldn't speak at the time, and I was like making the sign for glasses because they had my glasses in a bag, but they're asking me to write to them. But I couldn't see where the pad of paper it was. So I was trying to write and not kind of see, and I was like going, give me my glasses, like, and so I can see.
I
And I
suppose
had all the,
would you while you're sort of in the hospital like that, because I can't imagine that you're supposed to be trying to get better and you can't sleep. That this sort of doesn't quite
you
sort
got
of
to do
work together,
something,
does it?
you know. You have to. And I think my roommate complained a couple of times that she would wake up suddenly in the night and she could just hear rattle, 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 type, 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 rattle, 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 rattle. And that was me going like 10 to the dozen. And I would have to be watching, you know, where my tube was and where my monitors and what stuff was and not moving too much because I would set everything off. And then the nurse would come running in and she would yell at me. And, you know, that would wake up my roommate who would be like, not
And you're just
happy with
thinking,
me at
listen,
all.
I have this word count I have to reach.
And I wrote 100,000 words in 3 weeks because I
No
did not
way.
sleep.
Oh my God, that is incredible.
I have no idea if it's any good because I sent it to my editor and then she asked me to extend the deadline twice. So I'm not sure if that's a good thing.
Well,
Um,
that is absolutely fantastic. And talk about making the most of
yeah,
a difficult situation.
you have to. And I mean,
Mm.
that's the thing with idiopathic rheumatoid arthritis. No, I'm not calling myself an idiot. I know when people hear that for the first time, they go, "Did she just say idiot?" No, idiopathic, which it means that it's like a disease that's evolved with me throughout my life. So it's always affected by my immune system. And the worst thing for me is I've had it since I was 2.5 years old, but it goes for everything in my body. So it could be a bone, it could be the lining of my cartilage or the cartilage or tissue or muscle or
And what
whatever
does
it
it then
just
inflame that
fancied.
part, does it?
Yeah, and it eats bone. That's another thing it likes to do is chew on bone. So I shattered my jaw joints and I had no idea. That wasn't fun. I literally yawned and my husband was sitting maybe 3 or 4 feet from me, and he heard it, and he said it sounded like glass breaking.
Oh
And
gosh.
all I did was yawn.
Wow.
And it started no, it'll be 8 years of hell now. Because I've had sepsis and I've had, osteocentesis to try and, stop them from having to replace the joints, but they had to anyway. So I've had 2 joint replacements. And of course, every time they do a joint replacement, you get a facelift for free. It's just part and parcel of it. So, but this last time, I had hit complications. So I spent sort of what was supposed to be a week and then go get married. Wasn't a week. It was 3 weeks, and my wedding had to get postponed.
Oh.
But I took the sort of humor in it, and I had psychiatric support. I was really lucky in the ward. They gave me support, and I had my husband, and I had my mom and my dad, who were down from Shetland at the time. And, it's also, we've got COVID going on, so I really didn't think they were letting anybody in to see me, but they understood that I needed Ian because I suffer from PTSD anyway. So I'm not only writing, but I'm trying to ignore the fact I've got PTSD episodes happening because I'm stuck in a hospital and I can't talk to anybody, and I've only got a bloody note, a whiteboard and pen, which really was not a form of communication.
No.
And, you're just sort of trapped there. And I thought, well, I'll write. And, when I can't write, because they stuck a chest drain in, I was like, I can watch stuff. And I did. I watched Carnival by, that was the one with Orlando Cruz, I think his name is, and some other really famous actress. And it's like a fairy tale steampunk crime thriller. And it was really odd and different. It's on Amazon Prime, and it's very, very different. And I watched that, and then I watched the Chicago Fire and Chicago PD and Med, which was a little bit brutal than I thought it was going to be. But I enjoyed it because it took me away from, I can't go for a pee without dragging like 4 or 5 things with me, and I'm not really allowed out of bed, or they complain at me. So how am I going to do this exactly? And it was that way you couldn't even lie comfortably in bed because you were so hot. The sweat was like sticking you to the bed all the time. So you were constantly trying to like move so that you weren't stuck. And it was very uncomfortable. And writing to me was that escape, that door that I could. And I think that's why I had an autumn setting for that book, because it was so hot in the bloody hospital. I wanted spiced pumpkin lattes and the cool breeze of autumn with the leaves falling, and just that nice imagery, rather than lying in a hot, stuffy room, desperate for the fan to reach me, but not reach me at the same time.
No, absolutely. Not surprising at all.
No, but it's amazing what you can write, though. So which character for you has stayed the longest or the most?
I don't know, because I suppose I always sort of love one each book. I mean, I think from my my Georgina Troy books, I suppose I love Luke Thornton. He's the first character. He was in the first book I wrote, A Jersey Kiss. That's my first book of my first series.
Yes.
He was just so lovely. I just loved him to bits. That's probably because that's the one I rewrote I don't know how many times. I just knew him so well. And then there's another one lots of people love. It's the best. It's done best out of all my books. I've now got eight books out, two series, as Georgina Troy. And that was Winter Whimsy. That was a different series. That's the Boardwalk by the Sea series. And that was Oliver Whimsy. He was a really lovely character. And then I suppose Hans from An Iron War, he was a German officer who was billeted in Estelle Lemaitre's home, the girl of the book. And I was very aware writing this because it was very difficult for young girls. On the island, you have these handsome guys coming in, but they are the enemy. So obviously, you don't want your daughter or whatever to get involved with them. Obviously, those sorts of things did happen, but it was very much frowned upon. And I didn't want to sort of write that. So it was a very difficult one because it was a romance. So obviously, you want some connection with them, but I had to be very careful how I did it. But I did love Hans, and I had one friend, bless her, I actually had to write an epilogue, which was thankfully put in the book before it went to print, because it'd only been out a few days, and people just needed to know what happened to Hans after the war, and the book ended at the war, so I had to do an epilogue, and my publisher very kindly actually added it to it.
Yes.
So early reviews sort of say, "Oh, the ending, I wasn't happy with the ending." So anyway, that changed, but the reviews are obviously still there, the very early ones. And I had one friend literally phone me up. She actually was on Facebook, the chat thing, so I could see her face, and she was sobbing. She said, "Oh my God, I love Hans so much, and what happened to?" And I get emails from people about Hans. So he was lovely. I did love him myself. So I suppose him really, and then the next one will be Jack from The Beekeeper's War. I did love Jack Garland. I've noticed all the men that I'm loving, isn't it?
Yeah, but then that's a good thing.
But no, I love them too. But I think there's always a part of, well, there is with me. There's always a part of me in all my main female character. You know, my heroine of each book, my protagonist. There's always a part of me in there somewhere. So I suppose with each one, I sort of do fall in love with the hero myself. So Katie Ford, actually, I remember, I think it was Katie Ford said at a talk once, she said, romantic novelists don't need to go out and have affairs because they actually have them in their head all the time with their characters.
That is so true, fine. Yes.
So yeah, that is so true. I don't need to go and do it myself, yeah.
Is there a character that you wish you could write more about?
I think probably Hans from Nine War, yes. I've had so many emails from readers saying they would love to know what happened later on, and would I write a follow-up book, say maybe about 15 years later. I haven't got a plan to do that, and with my publishers there's no plan to do that. Maybe at some point in the future I will.
I think everyone, with the fact that everyone adores him so much and you adore him so much.
Yeah, and I do, and I know exactly what happened in my head.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even had people email me saying, "I think this, that, and the other happens. Can you please tell me that's the case?" And I sort of go back and say, "Well, yes, or pretty much it's this, that, and the other." And I think the other one, Florence Boot, I wrote my, again, I was commissioned to write the Mrs. Boot series for HarperCollins for one more chapter. And she was a Jersey lady, but fell in love with Jessie Boots, who was 13 years older than her. And of course, the lady behind Boots the Chemist. And she was, I thought I knew about her because over here they were great philanthropists. And we've got the most amazing Coronation Park, which is open to the public. After Jessie died, she had, it's St. Matthew's Church. We know it as the Glass Church, completely renovated, and brought René Lalique, Lalique crystal over. And the windows are Lalique crystal. The font is, there's these huge angels above the altar. It's absolutely incredible inside this church. If anyone actually does come to Jersey, they must see it. And the most amazing thing is when the island was occupied during the war, it wasn't damaged. Nothing was damaged.
Wow.
I was amazed. I love Lalique, and I was amazed in the 80s. I knew there was this place. I mean, I live here, for heaven's sake. But when I went there and realised that every window, every glass panel in the doors, every door handle, everything is made out of Lalique crystal. It is absolutely staggering. And they gave masonettes, and we've got FB fields where lots of the school children do sports and that sort of thing. So they gave so much back to the island. She was an incredible character. So researching her was amazing, and I did her 3 books. So the first book was solely set in Jersey, where they met and fell in love, and it was their falling in love. The second book was her young family. They are now in Nottingham, and as the children grow up. And the third book was set during the First World War. I'm obviously very comfortable writing about the First World War and the Second World War, but specifically the First World War in this case. And some people were, they were the main, obviously the family characters that were real characters.
Yes.
Then I had fictional characters, secondary characters. And I met her great-granddaughter, a lovely lady, and through her met her daughter, and I think her nephew, and also her daughter's daughter. And she showed me private, family photographs and stories, and I heard so much. I've got much greater sense, a rounded sense of Florence Boot from this wonderful lady. And I just absolutely loved it. I'm actually going over to Nottingham to talk. I think it's National Book Week in June to talk
Yeah.
about Florence Boots. I've been invited over to do a talk, and I'm looking forward to that because I love talking about Florence Boots. And I was actually invited to go to the Boots Archive in Nottingham before I wrote the first book, and I was in this room with this most so many photos, and she used to give these silk scrolls to her girls, she called them, at Christmas with a beautiful sort of saying on it or something inspiring, and this enormous book with everybody's names in that they gave her as a big thank you. She used to take all her girls and her staff out, for tours and things like that. She made sure they all had
Yeah.
breakfast, like cocoa in the morning. She was an incredible lady. And it was just so fascinating to see these things and touch these things that she actually had touched herself. Remarkable lady.
Yeah.
So I also get asked a lot, will there be a fourth book? I've certainly got everything for a fourth book, but at the moment there's no
Yeah.
plan for that. So that's just a
Oh,
trilogy at the moment. Yeah.
yeah. But it would, you never know. That's what I say.
Oh, you never know.
You
That I
never
always
know.
could do. Yes, I absolutely always could do. And I think my dream would actually be to have that the Mrs. Boots series made into some TV series or something like that, because I think it would be fabulous.
As
Such a strong
somebody has just
character.
signed, I signed my first ever screenplay and my TV series, and it was just through a shopping agreement, but it felt huge.
Yeah.
I almost sort of warn writers against it because you kind of get excited and you think, "Oh my God, it's going to get made, it's going to get made," and we think that writing books is a long process. Entertainment world is so much more complicated. In fact, if you follow this podcast, a couple of weeks from now, or a couple of weeks from when yours comes out, I will actually have the creative head of Magnetic Box Films, who I actually signed with, Sean Flanagan, on, who's actually become quite a dear friend of mine in New York, and his job is to make films, and he loves horror and he loves crime and he loves all these thrillers and stuff, and then he comes and he meets me over Christmas, and it's like, hi, I want to do a romance drama with wrestlers and dancers and really sort of thrilling storylines, and he just sort of was like, oh, let me
Okay.
read it and then I'll and I thought he's going to email me back and say no. And, I also had a rom-com that I signed with him. And actually, no, he was one of the first people that just sort of went, you've really got something here. Let's chase after this. And we've worked together since Christmas and we just keep plugging away at it. But
Oh,
it's
best
such
of
a
luck with that.
long
Congratulations
journey
too.
and I wrote the screenplay myself, and I wrote this, both of them. I wrote the pilot for the TV series, and I wrote the screenplay for the feature. And it's such a different style of writing
Yeah.
entirely. It's such an alien world because you don't get description. You get a line, just one,
Yeah.
that you can say, she's doing this or she's wearing that, but they don't like you describing your characters because they have this kind of, they like it to be bland so that the director can come in and whoever he sees is kind of how he wants to take it. And that just felt so weird to me. And I adapted it from a novel, and a novel that I've rewritten since then, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that it gets picked up by Wild Rose Press. And it's a fun, light-hearted rom-com with a girl who wakes up and she's married her best friend, but it's her brother's best friend.
Oh.
And he didn't want her to marry a wrestler, but her marriage actually impacts the rest of her group of friends. So it's
Oh
a
wow.
ripple out effect.
Yeah.
And it's like it has that knock on effect. And then we signed, obviously, Marie's World, which is the TV series that we agreed on. And again, I had to kind of break it down because it was so layered. So you've got Marie, who's fleeing the fact that, her sister's done this awful thing to her. But you also have to get that guilt across that she carries, that she's not talking to her sister, that she's not there to protect her sister, that she's depending on this half sister who she doesn't really know to take care of her twin sister. And of course, she's not going to, because, you know, twins never do. Twins are always there for each other. And she kind of goes back to wrestling to protect her sister. But she almost has to forgive her sister first before she can do it. And it's kind of the, you know, the fact her estranged husband finds her, and you know, why are they estranged kind of gets brought up quite a bit. And then you also have the question, is she having an affair with his brother? So there's that kind of going on. And now she's got a new boyfriend. So how does he fit in it now? And that was, getting that condensed into 60 minutes was just so difficult.
Don't even know how you would even do that.
But I have to kind of think on it as the first book will be a season.
Yeah.
Rather than just one.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to kind of almost look at it completely different in that regard. So what techniques have you found helpful, and what ones do you wish that you hadn't tried?
Let me think. Techniques. Well, I think the thing is not good for me to try so much is just by coming up with a quick idea and just writing. That doesn't work for me quite so much. I'm much better if I do an outline, because I now know that I will do the first 30,000 words, like I think an awful lot of people do. You know, that what is it, saggy middle, and then you get to think, where was I going with this? So, and I don't know, and that sort of thing. So for me, I know what works best is to do an outline. And I will do, you know, the sort of backstory, then the beginning, the sort of middle with all the different conflicts, why it's not working, and then, you know, the end, the sort of resolution, stuff like that. So I have that quite detailed, so that when I am thinking, it's like, who are these people and why am I doing this? You know, I hate everything about this. I actually go back and think, oh no, actually I was going this way. Yes. And I sort of just spark up again with it. The second sort of, that's my first draft, I sort of then get it down. And the second draft, I then go through and I do more layers, because I know my characters better. I put in more emotion. It just put the little different layers in the second draft. And then I'll sort of send it off to my editor and hope for the best.
Well, now we're going into your life. This is the next part of the podcast, which is a lot of fun, because it's about getting to know us as people, rather than these mythical beings that live in big houses and have servants and doesn't do the washing and has no idea how to cook or whatever. So this is a great part, and I love this part because it really kind of demythifies us a little bit. So what's the first thing you do when you want to de-stress from writing and editing at the end of the day?
I suppose, well, the first thing I do is I walk my dogs. I've got 3 rescue dogs. So they're all 3 very different characters, one of whom has got an operation on Thursday.
Oh no!
Oh yes, it's a cruciate ligament. One actually damaged his, slowly wore down, and he had an operation last year. And it's between 8 and 10 weeks of really good care, and they have to be lifted. It's not going to be fun. Then this second one, who I've got having an operation on Thursday, he ran up the stairs to shout at the postman out the window or something. And he literally snapped his leg, and because they're rescue dogs, they didn't have good feeding, you know, when they were very young. He's an old street dog, this one. And snapped his cruciate ligament, he did. So that was a bit of a nightmare.
Yes, I can imagine.
And he has unfortunately damaged the other one. So we had 2 last year, and now he's done it again. Not as badly this time. And I do know what I'm in for, but unfortunately I know what I'm in for, you know, when
it's that way where you sometimes it's nice not to know what you're in for.
Not deal with it, but I know it's gonna be a long haul. So with them, we've got 2 beaches near us, and so and Leland, which is a lovely headland. So tend to walk them every day on that. That's sort of a great de-stressor for me. And I watch a lot of series and stuff. I watch TV. I love TV. So I tend to sort of not finish till about sort of 7-ish, something like that. And then I walk the dogs, and then I'll come back and I'll probably write a bit more. But then I'll watch TV, just something on TV. Like, I think Pieces of Her, I watched that recently. I love series.
Yes.
Bridgerton, of course.
Everyone
Viking,
does, yep.
everyone does. Viking Valhalla, I love that. Um,
Yeah.
and The Last Kingdom, I love that. So series, really, because I think you can
It's
watch it and
funny.
not think too much.
Yeah, I mean everyone's been talking me into Anatomy of Scandal.
I've seen the first one of that. Yes, I'm going to watch
Is it
that.
good?
I
Is it?
enjoyed it. Yeah, I did enjoy it.
I'm gonna have to give it a try because so many people have said to me, stop diddly dallying about whether you should read the book or not. Just go watch it and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But the thing was, I read Outlander, and then I couldn't watch it because I knew what the end of the first book was.
Oh, right.
And then I couldn't watch the beginning of season 2 because it's all about what happened at the end of
Oh, I
book
see.
1.
Oh,
Yeah, so I was like, I was kind of gutted. So I might read the series, but I don't think I'll ever watch it. And
yeah.
the other series that everyone got on to me about was Game of Thrones, and I couldn't watch Game of Thrones.
Oh,
My
I
husband
loved
did.
it.
I thought it was too brutal for me in a way. I just found I was like, no. And then I watched Vikings, and I was like, well, how can I watch Vikings if I can't watch these other ones? So it was kind of like a weird
Yeah.
contradiction. And then a family friend of ours actually knows the guy that's in Line of Duty,
Oh, right.
the BBC series.
Oh, I
So
love
he knew the
that.
actor in it. So we all ended up watching that, and it was kind of like a big
Oh,
family
Martin
congregational
Constant.
thing. Yeah.
Oh, I watch
And
anything he's in. I love him.
then I found The True Detective, which has got Matthew McConaughey in it.
My son watched that and thought it was great, but I found that too brutal, so I didn't watch it.
I've watched the first 4 episodes, and it's that way. I'm okay if I'm watching it in sewing because I'm not directly watching it, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it
So I
does.
think I'll be okay if I keep doing it like that. It was like the same
Sort
when I
of
was
half
watching
watching it,
Vikings.
yeah.
Yeah, because like if I'm sewing and because I'm terrible. I grew up with a grandmother that believed we all should be ladies and ladylike, so we had to knit and sew and know how to pour the tea and know all the manners of being in people's houses and know that you're supposed to make the tea if they're your in-laws and that kind of thing. So I have a terrible habit that I take my cross stitch into bed and we'll pop the laptop on and we'll pop it between us and I'll stick something on and we'll watch it together. But my husband's a little bit nervous because he's convinced one of these days he's going to roll over and I've forgotten to take the scissors out of the bed and he gets stabbed or something. So he does do this little check at the end of the night where he goes, is the scissors in the
Checking, yeah.
drawer? Is the needle
Wise man.
definitely in the canvas? Do you know where it is? Okay, I can go to sleep then. Because it's so funny because my dad got impaled by a set of knitting needles by his own mother.
Oh,
So
God.
my dad was awful at throwing himself in chairs when he would go in to see my grandmother. And one day she used to pop the knitting down the side of the chair, as all grannies did. And of course, this one day she had a knitting belt, and normally she would put the pointy ends in her knitting belt and then put the belt in the chair. But she didn't, and my dad jumped into the seat. And he was so lucky, it just went right through the fatty tissue only of his side.
Oh.
But she felt so guilty after that. She used to
You
put
would, wouldn't
corks from wine bottles on the ends because she was terrified my dad would do it again. And so I always have that in the back of my head of making sure I know where the scissors are and the needles are because
Yes, I can see
I just
why.
don't want somebody to jump on a pair and just, and when my
wow.
dad came down, I hid the knitting because I was like, you ain't stabbing yourself in my house. I'm not taking you to the hospital,
Yes,
I'm
how do you
totally
explain that?
unsympathetic.
Yes, I didn't really stab him, officer, yeah.
Yeah, and my nan, she wasn't very sympathetic to him when he got stabbed with her knitting needles. She just sort of pulled them out and said, "Oh, you're fine," and stuck a sticky plaster on it.
Poor man.
But that was just the attitude for Shetland women.
Yeah.
You didn't go to A&E unless it was sort of falling off and it was definitely emergency.
Yeah.
But she thought it was hilarious because I spent more time in A&E than I did in my own house.
Shame.
I was one of those kids. If it was going to happen to somebody, it was going to happen to me.
Oh, shame.
So I rolled my ankles and I fell off fences and I dislocated my knee or I dislocated both my hips or my I would always have something, and if I screamed dad, which was my go-to, dad, he's like, oh god, she's done something. Right, okay, and my dad actually went and got his first aid certificates because of me. Because he was so sick and tired of having to bandage me back together.
Makes sense though, doesn't
and then
it?
he would use me as a practice dummy, yeah. So I was the practice dummy, and he would bandage me up and then leave me in the sofa so I couldn't run away. So my legs would be bandaged straight and my arms would be blinking out to the sides. And I used to swear when he did the first aid certificates. But it meant that he could almost tell whether it was an accident emergency situation or if it was a, oh, Crystal, here's an ice pack, shut up kind of situation. So yeah, but and I also did that if there was a spider in the house. So my dad never really quite knew.
Yes, that's the
what he was
difficult one, yeah, because that
through
is a sheer terror one, a spider, isn't it? I know it is for me.
And see here, I don't know what it is about where we stay now, but the spiders are like this size.
Ooh.
And yeah, I know, right? And of course, there was a big one in the hall, and my hubby saw it, and thank God he saw it because that would have been me. The house would have been screamed down. And he didn't want to kill it because he wasn't sure he could kill it with a book. It was that kind of big. So he knocked it off the wall and the cat just sliced it in two because it was like the cat knew, ooh, you're too big.
Cats are amazing for that, aren't they?
Yeah, and mine always plays with them.
Oh, I actually had my Schnauzer I used to have. Bless him, I once saw him when he was a puppy, he was playing with a spider, and I screamed so badly, I frightened him, and he was scared of spiders after that, bless him. So that wasn't very kind of me, but it was a reaction.
Yeah, it's just a fright. But my one, he plays it like he flips them over, and then he sniffs them.
Oh.
And then he obviously sneezes because they tickle his nose. And then they flip back over and then they try and run away. And then he runs after them and he hits them and they flop over. And eventually he ends up licking them because he wants to clean them. And when he licks them, obviously he eats them and then he wonders where it's gone. And I love him to bits, but see if I find a spider, I grab him, I pick him up, I carry him over and I drop him in front of it and I say, eat it. Especially if my husband's not home and I've got no one else to kill the spider, the cat gets told to do it.
In the house, definitely.
Yeah, and he loves it. I mean, unless it's in the bath, he doesn't like chasing them in the bath.
Oh,
because bless him, he doesn't have the coordination, so he looks a little bit like Blamby on ice. He just starts skittering all over the place, and then I kind of feel bad for him, so I don't put him in the bath. Or at least that cat doesn't go in the bath. But the other one that loves baths, he goes in instead. So, yeah, that's my trick if you've got lots of spider issues. Get a cat. Because they do tend to eat them for some reason.
Oh.
Don't know why. It's a very, very weird one. What hobbies do you enjoy and what ones do you wish you could explore if you had the time?
I think because writing was like such a big deal part of my life, it's always been like one thing I wanted to do, so it was really much of a hobby, I suppose.
Yeah.
And now it's what I do, of course. I do a lot of gardening. Not much. I mean, my husband does all the heavy stuff because it's not the interesting stuff, as far as I can tell. So I don't mind planting things. He hates when we go to a garden centre because I always want more and I always get far too much. And then I get home and think, oh, I've got to now plant these things. But I like deadheading and poddling about. Yeah, I like walking because we have lovely beaches and that sort of things. And sort of really just going out and meeting friends for coffee, that sort of thing. I mean,
that's the one I love, yeah.
Yeah, I did the gym. I was going to the gym for lockdown and I used to do it a lot when I was younger, but then I sort of stopped and then never got back into that again. I'd much rather sort of go for a walk outside.
It's hard to get back into it. Yeah. And it's such a restrictive, like now you go in and they expect you to sanitize the machines after you or sanitize them before you start, and they're really strict on that too. So it's not the same as it once was. Because I know what you talk about. I had to build muscles for the condition, so I understand that well. Are you a craft person? And if not, what do you do when you need to clear your mind and sort of kind of like shut down for a bit so that you're ready to start up again?
I'm not a craft person. I think I started knitting something when my first niece was born, and she's now got two children of her own, and she's in her 30s. So that's long distance. I'm just
I've heard that a lot, funnily
really,
enough.
I'm just not
Yeah.
very good at that. But no, I mean, fun enough, in lockdown, I did probably the same as an awful lot of people. I started doing jigsaw puzzles, and I always seem to have one on the go. So I have one on my dining room table all the time, really. So if I've just got, I don't know, some time where I'm not writing or I'm not out with the dogs, or just maybe got 10 minutes, I'll sort of sit there and just I just don't think when I do that, and that's probably why I did it during
Yeah.
lockdown, because it was something where you're not thinking, and you needed to
Yeah.
not think then quite a lot of the time, I think.
It's weird because lockdown it made me go back to crafts because
Oh,
I did
really?
that so much in hospital for
Mm.
so long when I didn't write and I didn't know writing was such a good outlet. So for me, like, I learned to cross stitch and I learned to knit, and I found diamond painting in lockdown. And I'd never done that before. I'd done like silk painting and mosaics and that kind of thing, but I'd never done anything like that. And my mum was driving me mental because she's one of these people that she was trying to calm herself, but she was so anxious about COVID and work and scared to bring home COVID to me
Yeah.
that she was almost worrying herself sick constantly. So I came up with crafts as a way to kind of chill her out on her days off. And it kind of exploded into this diamond painting bonanza of lockdown. And me and her would do it for 2-3 hours a day, and it really reduced her anxiety and it really helped.
That's
And I
good.
actually found it reduced mine too, and it
Yeah.
it really helps because you weren't thinking about it. We would stick a podcast on, something that she could watch or I could listen to, and we would do it at the dining room table, and it worked. And then I got my dad painting, and he hadn't painted since he was a little boy, and it was really good for him because it meant he wasn't thinking about work and
I think an
lodge and
awful lot
stuff.
of people had to find ways to take their mind away from what was happening.
Yeah.
Yes, like you, I'd listen to. I still do now, actually. I listen to an audiobook while I'm doing a puzzle, um,
Yeah.
and it's just complete switch off from my anxiety of, well, now I'm much better. I'm not so anxious. I mean, I was anxious then because
Yeah.
my mother was also living in South Africa, and it was just all too much.
Awful there. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very difficult. She was sort of stuck there, really. And so I think an awful lot of people found new ways to relax and to take their mind off themselves and the anxiety. And
Especially with everyone having their hobbies cancelled because
yeah, if
you
you
would
can't
you
go
would go
out, what
out
can
for
you do?
football or
Yeah,
whatever, that was your Friday or your Saturday night, or you went to the pub, or everyone had these little routines that they did to get away from the stress
yeah.
of work, and then all of a sudden they didn't have
And you
that
don't
because
have
guess what,
that.
you're stuck in the house. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think
So
I
I
didn't
think
leave the
crafts was good for
house.
that.
I mean, I've got a garden, so I'm lucky that I've got an outside space. But I didn't leave the house. I think it was for about 11 weeks. We could go
Yeah, I was the
down. So I
same.
think we could have 2 hours a day, for essential shopping or for exercise. Um,
Yeah.
and so my husband took the dogs out, and eventually said, you're getting a little bit too comfortable being at home all the time. You need
Yes.
to
So
actually
did mine.
get out of the house. And I had to start going out and walking the dogs with them again and stuff like that. And I did feel much better. But I think, yes, it was a very weird time, wasn't it?
Yeah. And I must admit, I've kept the crafts going. So like if I don't have a day where I'm podcasting and I need, I've done my 1,000 words or whatever, and I just need time to get my brain to stop
Yeah,
jumping in 50 different directions. I'll go and I'll stick the computer on to like something, a podcast or whatever that I want to catch up on, and I will diamond paint or I will paint, and it's great because they make fantastic Christmas presents
yeah,
and they're so much cheaper, and they're more appreciated too because people know that you sat and take the time to do it.
yeah,
So for me, it's almost like a way for me to work through my writing issues, but without having to physically go anywhere because a lot of the time I haven't been able to do that.
yeah.
So for me, my illness slows me down, makes me appreciate the day, and makes me do things that makes me appreciate the day. What's the thing that you would say makes you appreciate the day and sort of takes your makes you say, okay, I'm glad I'm doing this?
I think when I was going through my divorce, years and years ago, my children both very small, I got very, very anxious. And it was my sister, and she wrote me this list, and it was like 1 to 10, and at the end was if all else fails, eat chocolate sort of thing. And it was things
Yeah.
like light a candle, nice thingy candle, whatever. Go outside and smell the roses. And she got literally lean forward and smell that rose, smell the scent of that rose and think about it. And she did this list for me, and I actually did do that. And it was the first time I appreciated things like, the brightness of
The
green, like a
sun.
green hedge or a green grass
Yeah.
after rain and stuff like that. And it made me focus on those sorts of things. So I love walking around my garden and looking at the plants and breathing them in and stuff. And I do, as I say, I live near like you do in Shetland. I live near the sea, and it's very loud. Obviously, I can hear it all the time. And every night I go outside and I always look up at the stars. I love looking at the stars and the moon or whatever. And I just sort of listen to the sea, and it totally calms me down. Not that I'm not very calm, actually. Nowadays, I tend to be quite calm. But it's just sort of relaxing, gets my brain ready to
Yeah.
sort of go to bed. And then I sort of like breathe in a few times and try and sort of like work out what are those scents. It's always slightly
Yeah.
salty air, or, if someone's mowed a lawn, you get that sweetness or something. And I love doing that sort of thing. Or just sort of like where I am now, this is very recently built this. And the other day I was sitting with the door open and I thought, oh, that's so noisy. And then I thought, what is the noise? It was birdsong. I thought,
Yeah.
how can anyone think that is bad? And I thought, stop it.
Yeah. No, I've gone through that. When I first moved back down and the birds were really loud, and
Yeah.
here the birds talk to the cows and the cow talks back,
Oh,
right? So you open your back door and it's moo.
it's weird, isn't it? I think because I've
You just
been
sort of look twice as if to say, did that cow just answer that bird?
That's so bizarre. But you don't sort of hear. I mean, I wrote in a shed for years, and then it got very rotten and stuff. So I worked from a box room inside. That was my office for
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 years, until I got this. So I was not used to working and listening to all the noise outside so much. Of course,
Yeah.
now I have the doors open or the window open. It's like, what on earth is that? You think,
Yeah.
okay, that's nature. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
No, I understand that well, because like I went to put the rubbish out the other night, and honestly, that whole thing with the cow and the ravens, I was just like, if I walked into like an alternate universe or something, this is just bizarro land. So what's your favorite place to curl up during the day? Do you like the garden, the cafe, reader's note? Where do you go to just
We tend
read
to
a
be, I
book?
mean, if it's very warm here, definitely the garden.
Yeah,
If
but it's
it's not
Britain, so
too,
it's
too
not
windy, we're
always.
quite high where I am, so it can be quite windy. Um, I've got a conservatory and I love sitting in there. I just love it. There's sort of a sense,
That's my favorite too, but I
really,
don't have one at
you
the
walk
moment.
in a
Yeah,
sense of, it's like being
my
outside,
aunt's is favorite.
but
Yeah,
it's, warmer, cozy and comfortable
my
and stuff.
I was so lucky growing up because my aunt had this huge, massive conservatory, and you could have a dining table and a sitting area and all this other crazy ass stuff in it. And I loved in the summer when my nan would take me to hers because she'd be babysitting, and I would sit in her conservatory, and I would read for a really long time, drinking tea and just sometimes having lemonade if my nan was feeling a little bit worried about my weight or whatever, and it was lovely. And she used to let me go up quite frequently and just sort of sit in there, and we would have our teas and our coffees in there and just chat. And then my nan also had this window seat in her living room that overlooked the main
Oh,
road
lovely.
with this like bench seat on it that my grandfather had made her. And I loved that bench seat so much because we would just sit there and we would read, or we would talk about life, or what was going on with me, or why I was hiding at hers or whatever. And she loved that, and I loved that too. And that's what I really want when I get my permanent
Yes,
home,
I
is to
love
have
the
a
idea
window
of a
seat
window seat. So
or a
fabulous.
conservatory that I can go into,
Mm.
and that's just my area, and I can close the door and the cats don't get in, and I can just
Yeah.
have some peace and quiet for 5 minutes. And yeah, and my husband's great. He built me a craft table, so I have that for going to. And I have I had a reader's nook, but because we had to get more sofas because my mum and dad were staying for a little while, I had to go get another sofa. So my little living room is a bit cramped now. So sometimes I just go to the bath and I disappear in there, and that's my place to go. And then I read in bed at night, and those are my sort of favorite hidey holes, so to speak. So yeah. Now we're going on to the fun part of the podcast. The readers the listeners will love this. From my small trial they did anyway. So we're going to play a word association game. So you can associate these words to a book or to a word, whatever you feel comfortable with. Just fire something back at me and we'll take it from there.
Okay.
So the first phrase I should say is ice cream cake.
Oh, ice cream cake. I don't know. I don't. So I haven't got a book that sort of goes with that. I don't think. I suppose ice cream cake. The only ice cream cake I think I ever recall having was my stepfather years ago bought one as a big surprise for us all, but nobody liked it because it had fruit in it. Didn't like it.
I remember my grand's 90th. She had a big ice cream cake, and I remember I've got two sensitive teeth. So when you bite into, and I don't like biting ice cream for that reason, and it was just this slice of frozen ice cream layers.
Ooh.
And I remember thinking to myself, I hate this because I've got sensitive teeth, but I have to smile and look like I'm enjoying it because she's watching me. And I was like, kind of, while sort of grimacing in the background thinking, oh, this hurts. So how about cookies?
Cookies. That's actually got to be chocolate. So anything to do with chocolate, as far as I'm concerned. I realised last year.
I like that one.
Sorry?
I said I like that answer because like chocolate chips is like the favorite kind for everybody, isn't it?
Yes, got to be chocolate.
Yeah.
So
brownies.
Sorry?
Brownies.
Oh, brownies. Same sort of thing, chocolate. I'm a bit of a chocolate addict, unfortunately. My sister's nutritional therapist told me last year they have far too much sugar in my diet, so I cut it right down.
Yeah.
But yes, so most things probably associate with chocolate in my head.
Oh, don't worry about that. That's fine.
Sunshine. I suppose living here. I mean, my new series is Sunshine Island series.
Well, there you go. I did tie that one into your book, actually.
Oh, so did you?
I kind of threw you one.
We're supposed to be the funniest place in the British Isles. Warmest by, I don't know, probably a degree or something. But yeah, it's sunny here a lot usually. Yeah.
What about beaches?
Beaches, again, here. We're surrounded by beaches. So, yeah. All my books have scenes on the beaches in some form or order because that's why I am every single day.
Yeah, well, that's a good reason. So how about honey?
I love honey. It's one thing I've had to not have because I've had to cut right back on my sugar. I shouldn't have any sugar really. And that's the only thing I miss chocolate, but not quite so terribly. But I miss honey so much because I had that on my toast every single day. I
have it in my coffee
at some point because I love honey so much. And Winnie the Pooh and honey, everybody read Winnie the Pooh growing up, didn't they? I love that.
Yeah, I did as well. So waves is the next one.
Waves?
Yeah.
Oh, I love the sound of the waves. That's why I listen to every single night before I go into bed. I love it. And I actually posted a video on, did I? Yes, I think I did, probably on my Instagram. At Easter, it was so lovely. My daughter was over and we went down to St. Juan's Beach. It's a very wide expanse of beach. And the waves are lovely. It's where people surf at St. Juan's. And we just stood and paddled in the sea. It was pretty freezing. But it was lovely with the crashing waves. I just love that. I must have millions of photos of crashing waves. I just love it.
The next one is actually sea. So
sea.
It's a good lead-in.
Yeah, the one thing I think about, I mean, I was lucky enough to go, we had 5 holidays cancelled, but we eventually went on our 6th attempt in February to the Caribbean on a cruise, my husband and I. and the sea is such a beautiful turquoise there. And you come back here, and the thing that I love about the sea here, my mother, it makes me think of my mother. And she's here a lot now, so she even sees it for herself. And she's always said that she loves the colour of the sea just, while there's a storm on. She goes and parks the car and looks at it because it's that sort of like jade green. I love the different colours of sea.
Yeah, I like that too. And growing up in Shetland, you have, depending what part of the island you were at, kind of depended on the color that you would see. So yeah, I like that too. And the last one, but not least, is children's laughter.
Oh gosh, children's laughter. I think it's just so free and so joyous, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why I like it. And I just thought it tied in with the beach theme quite well. So yeah.
It's very much, if you see these little videos of little children, or if you see a baby or little child laughing, that real laughter, I find you tend to end up laughing yourself, even though you have no idea probably what they're laughing at. No,
you don't.
It's addictive is not the word, but it's sort of I can't think of the word actually, but it makes infectious. Thank you, that is the word. Yeah, it's infectious, and I love that.
Don't worry, I've had that day all day, so
yeah, no,
you've got my total understanding, because honestly, I played that game with Mike earlier today, Mike Craven, for the crime author, and I kept getting stuck on words, and bless him, he knew kind of where I was going with stuff, so he just threw me a bone every so often.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but everyone's sort of hearing you the week after him, so yeah, I was such a saving grace, it really was. And me and him, we did 2.5 hours today as well, so it's been interesting. But thank you so much for coming on.
It's been so truly much an honor to me. I've really enjoyed it.
And we'll have to have you on when you have your next release.
Absolutely.
That's what I say. Let me know when your next book's coming out, and I'll have you back on, because this is like going to run all year round. So, which is good, because then authors who have got new books coming out, they can get in touch and say, "Hey, my book's out, such and such. Okay, we'll get you on the month before or something." It's
brilliant.
It's good, because it means I can sort of roughly schedule it for then, and also it means that if I get the book beforehand, I can sometimes tie the questions into the book a little bit better too. So it's handy, because I'm doing that with Shirley Cannon. She just sent me her one over, and when I did Fiona Cummings's podcast, then we did that as well. So it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. So thank you so much for coming on. I know it was a bit of a hassle, but we got there.
We did get there.
So
it's been good fun.
Yeah, and you guys will not believe who's on next week. It's another amazing female author, and I cannot wait to share you all with her. So make sure you check in next week. Bye.